In December of 1988, after spending the year playing live with the Blue Notes and recording with Crosby, Stills and Nash, Neil Young felt like he needed a change. Another change. The first ones to go were the extensive horn section he had assembled for the Blue Notes tour. After a late night viewing of the Who's movie The Kids Are Alright, Young started hankering for some volume again, so the horns were out and the big amps were back. He booked into the Hit Factory in Times Square in New York with Rick Rosas and Chad Cromwell from the Blue Notes. He dubbed this new power trio Young and the Restless. According to a tech who worked the sessions were very intense and went all through the night. In sharp contrast to his last few recordings through the 1980s, Young had decided to go back to playing live in the studio. In fact, he set up a huge PA and monitor system in the room, which caused the engineers all sorts of problems. This was the era of extreme isolation in the studio, with every sound being recorded meticulously isolated with the minimum amount of sound leakage from one track to the next. Instead though, Young was now insisting on hearing his vocal coming back through a huge monitor speaker live as if they were playing on stage. And instead of the stripped down single amp setup he had used for the Blue Notes, Young now got out his old Fender Deluxe amp and fed it through various combinations of bigger and bigger amps for an absolutely monstrous guitar assault. Young took the signal from his Deluxe and fed it through a Marshall stack, resulting in the biggest, most distorted sound you ever heard, according to his guitar tech, Larry Cragg. It was loud in there. Excruciatingly loud, he said. Young and his engineer, Nico Bolas, were living up to their name as the volume dealers as they proceeded to blow up a pair of monitor speakers. You get a taste of this chaos in the studio listening to the song Cocaine Eyes, which starts with Young's amp buzzing uncontrollably, and you can hear Young saying, "Yeah, but it sounds good though," before they launch into the song, which was most probably written after Young's experience of recording again with nose candy enthusiast Stephen Stills earlier that year. The guitar solo in this song is a spasmodic fit of deranged anger that erupts like a sonic volcano from Old Black and the Deluxe. And in fact the same can be said for all the solos on this batch of songs, which were compiled and released as a 5-track EP called El Dorado, limited to Japan and Australia in April of 1989. Young had not rocked this hard in the studio since Reactor in 1981. The song Heavy Love climaxes with Young screaming his throat to shreds whilst the guitar basically sounds like an earthquake. The song Don't Cry was conceived by Young as Roy Orbison meets heavy metal, and it's hard to argue with that designation upon listening, as Young goes from the clean tones of the verses with its soaring melody to a wordless chorus that consists of an absolute torrent of unmitigated brain-rattling distortion from Old Black, before going back to the quiet verse section. This song is another one of the many reasons that Neil Young got assigned the title of Godfather of Grunge in the early 90s, as this format of quiet, understated verse to loud, enormous chorus became hugely popularised by Nirvana just a couple of years later. Young wasn't the inventor of this quiet, loud, quiet structure, but when he did it with gusto. Also on the EP was On Broadway, which is a cover of the classic Drifters song from 1963 that Young reinterprets with a grittier, grimier, down-and-out perspective, complete with guitar explosions and ending the song yelling about crack. The final song on the EP was El Dorado, a song Young had had lying around since the 1986 tour and was much more restrained in its guitar work, being mostly acoustic, although there's still a couple of little eruptions of volcanic distortion here and there, which give the song a certain tension appropriate to its subject matter, which, like Tired Eyes from the album Tonight's the Night, is a catalogue of drugs, money and murder. So at first Young had compiled these songs along with the songs Wrecking Ball, Someday and Crime in the City to make an album called Times Square, which was offered to his label, Reprise. "I don't think they really liked the record at all," said Nico Bolas. "When we played it for them, they just kind of stared at the ceiling." So Young decided to take 5 of the songs and put out an EP instead. Limited to 5,000 copies only, and only released in Japan and Australia, the EP flew largely under the radar, so few people heard it at the time, but this release actually signalled a major new phase in Young's career. The signs were there, even on the cover for the record. For the first time since Rust Never Sleeps, Young's own handwriting adorned the cover, and musically speaking, he was once again making music in a studio that actually lived up to the intensity of his live performances. Not everyone who heard it liked it, of course. Graham Nash, for example, according to Nico Bolas, was not a fan of Neil's heavier side. There were vile juices flowing from Graham's mouth when he heard that record, he said. He turned it off and said, "I absolutely hate this record. I've never seen anyone with more disgust in their eyes." But let's not get too far gone. Before the release of the EP in April, back in January of '89, having just recorded the songs in classic Neil Young style, he took his new trio out on the road to play a few shows to unsuspecting fans who probably thought he would be coming out with the Blue Notes after a few acoustic songs. Instead, after the opening acoustic set, he brought out The Restless, consisting of Roses, Cromwell and Poncho, and they would launch into Heavy Love, followed by the other Times Square / Eldorado songs, played with just as much intensity as the recorded versions. According to a fan who attended shows at the Bronco Bowl in Dallas and the next night in Houston, Young thrashed around the stage screaming like a nut. "It was so loud, he split my brain open," he said. His guitar was just deafening. You could actually see the sound waves. The setlist remained pretty much the same throughout this short tour up until one night in February, on the 21st, in Seattle, when Young and the Restless performed a brand new song. In fact, it was so new that not even the band knew it. Neil and Poncho had literally just run through this song a few times on acoustic guitars on the tour bus a few days before, and then when they got to Seattle, Young said to Poncho, "Don't tell the guys, but we're doing it tonight. We'll initiate them." According to Poncho, Neil used to do this with Crazy Horse all the time. So it was thus that Rocking in the Free World was born. The song had originated just a few days earlier, when Poncho and Young had been watching the news on TV. The Ayatollah of Iran was in the news as he had just issued his fatwa against the British author Salman Rushdie on the 14th of February. A price of $5 million was put on Rushdie's head by the Ayatollah, and there were mass demonstrations in Iran and threats to blow up British Airways flights to India. Now, Poncho stated in a 2013 interview with Rolling Stone that at the time they were watching news reports about the death of the Ayatollah, but he probably misremembered this, as the Ayatollah did not die until June. Whilst these alarming scenes played out on the screen, Young and Poncho were also talking about how the possibility of them playing in Russia had literally just fallen through, which led to Poncho saying, "I guess we'll just have to keep on rocking in the free world." According to Poncho, Neil said, that's pretty cool. Is that a song you're working on? When Poncho said no, Young said, "Well, if you don't use it, I will." Keep on rocking in the free world. A big part of the appeal of the phrase was described by Young in an interview later. "It was just such a cliche. I knew I had to use it." You can actually hear this first performance of the song Rockin' in the Free World when they played it in Seattle on the 21st of February 1989. As of the time of the recording of this video, it is on YouTube. The whole show is there, and it's astonishing how quickly Roses and Cromwell grasped the fundamentals of the song. It's positively cooking with energy right from the start, even if the changes are still somewhat unfamiliar. And it's very interesting to note that Young himself is still searching for the right melody and phrasing as the song is being played. By the second chorus, he starts singing it in that higher register, and then that becomes the chorus thereafter. For a first run through with a band, it's pretty amazing, actually, and the song became a staple in the set for every night subsequently in that short tour, and then at pretty much every show Young has played since then too. Right from the start, it's clear that the song had an energy about it that's unstoppable. Much of the song's power stems from the dual meaning of the lyrics. It simultaneously celebrates and condemns life in the Western world. It accepts it for what it is, with all its flaws, which are horrifying, and seemingly with all its joys, which are innumerable. Ambiguity, when used correctly, doesn't weaken a song or any piece of art. It does in fact make it much more powerful, as it creates a tension between the competing ideas, which makes your brain go places and do things without you even realising. Rockin' in the Free World is one of those great pieces of art that uses ambiguity aggressively. It's a loud, chaotic song played at maximum volume. The phrase itself is both stupid and brilliant, and when sang in the chorus, "Keep on rockin' in the free world," it sounds like both sarcasm and a heartfelt declaration. The song is both a protest song and just a straight up stadium rock anthem. It somehow manages to be both ironic and not ironic at the same time. How does that work? It was the perfect anthem for 1989, the year of Tiananmen Square, renewed Middle East antipathy towards the West, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. But fascinatingly, unlike Young's other politically charged songs, such as Ohio, the lyrics brilliantly avoid becoming dated. There's no direct mention of Bush or the Ayatollah or any events that are referenced overtly, and as a result, the song has lost none of its immediacy well over 3 decades later. In fact, if anything, it's gained even more relevancy. If you dig a little below the surface, actually the lyrics do make references to the speeches of George Bush the first we're talking about here. 1,000 points of light was a phrase used in Bush's inaugural address, and the kinder, gentler nation that was promised by Bush in the election cycle was satirized by Young into kinder, gentler machine gun hand. The Ayatollah, of course, is also the influence behind the line, "Don't feel like Satan, but I am to them," the US being considered, of course, the great Satan. Young took the Restless over to Australia and New Zealand in April, renaming them the Lost Dogs, and gave audiences the same show as back in the US, complete with all the new heavy songs, including Rockin' in the Free World, before returning to the US for a solo acoustic tour. At these shows, Young chose to stand up, prowling around a very bare stage with his acoustic guitar, singing into a wireless microphone, giving these shows much more energy than you would normally expect at a solo acoustic show, as befitted the songs he sang, which included ballsy renditions of Crime in the City, Rockin' in the Free World, and a resurrected Ohio, which he dedicated to the Chinese students who had stood before the tanks in Tiananmen Square that June. The performances were electrifying, and the critics, for the first time in years, absolutely heaped praise on Young. His songs contrast an Edenic rural past with a brutal, corrupt present, said the New York Times of the shows in New York City in September, and he offered little hope beyond the stubborn refusal to give up, they said. After this solo tour, with enough songs now recorded to put out a new album, they were at the mastering stage of making the new record, but no title had been decided on yet. Just before we went out the door, Poncho said, Neil said, "You know what, man? Just put Freedom." And so Freedom was released in October 1989. For the first time in years, it was a Neil Young album with no overriding theme, stylistic conceit, or production gimmick. "I just wanted to make a Neil Young album per se," he said in an interview. "Something that was just me. No persona, no image, no distinctive character." In doing so, of course, the album turned out to have way more character, helped by the fact that it was his strongest collection in 10 years in terms of the songwriting. What also harked back to Rust Never Sleeps was the album opening and closing with the same song, acoustic and electric versions of Rockin' in the Free World, a la Hey Hey My Mind. With this album, he had finally delivered a worthy sequel to Rust Never Sleeps. David Geffen must have been seriously pissed. Also, like with Rust Never Sleeps, critics loved the album pretty much across the board, with Rolling Stone giving it 5 stars. One of the many great things about this album is that it really is a brilliant compilation of all the seemingly disparate strands of Young's music at this time brought back together on one album, whereas previously throughout the 1980s, Young would devote an entire album to one of those strands, whether it was country, rock or big band blues. Here we get the horns of the Blue Notes on Crime in the City and Someday, the country and folk side represented by The Ways of Love, Hanging on a Limb and Too Far Gone, and of course you get the full-on proto-grunge rock with Don't Cry, On Broadway and Rockin' in the Free World. The scope was again panoramic, not blinkered by the limitations of one particular genre. Around the time of the album's release, Young made a rare appearance on the television, having purposely avoided it like the plague for most of his career. He felt music on TV was treated like an afterthought, there to pad out the show as filler in the background. To counter this, on the 30th of September 1989, Young delivered one of the greatest live TV performances of live music of all time, when he appeared on the popular television programme Saturday Night Live. It nearly didn't happen. Drummer Chad Cromwell was actually touring Japan with Jackson Browne at this time, so Young had to bring in a new rhythm section. Drummer Steve Jordan had played on the Landing on Water album, and the bassist Charlie Drayton, along with Jordan, were part of Keith Richards' solo band, the Expensive Winos. Together with Poncho and Young, this combination was explosive, and an animated Young leapt around the stage whilst Jordan absolutely battered his kit using extra large cymbals. As he knew from experience, they usually sounded really muted coming through the TV. Witness to the event in the SNL studio that night was a young Conan O'Brien, who years later stated that Young melted the studio and left 30 Rock with structural damage. It was one of those rare music on TV moments that actually punched through the glass of the screen, and screens were actually glass then, so yeah. To get this elevated level of performance for just one short segment on a TV show, Young said he developed a whole new technique. I had my trainer, he said, and we just lifted weights and did calisthenics to get my blood to the level that it would be at after playing for 1 hour and 25 minutes on stage, which is usually how long I'd been on stage by the time we play that song. It was a brilliant strategy. As soon as the band launched into the song, it's like we're witnessing the climax of a 2-hour-long concert, which befits the occasion of being broadcast to millions. When you think about how lame music is on TV most of the time, this is why. They're just walking out there cold, no warm-up, no energy. This monster new lineup of a backing band, wittily dubbed YCS&P, Young, Charlie, Stephen, Poncho by Young, would sadly last for just this one performance. But the Saturday Night Live performance and the subsequent rave reviews for Freedom would cement Young's ascendant trajectory after floundering for years. Just like 10 years ago, Young had ended the decade on top, winning back the fans and critics alike after a series of seemingly endless detours and derailments. But in true Young style, he wasn't about to just rest on his laurels. This late resurgence was not just a flash in the pan, it was just the beginning. Young's relationship with engineer Nico Bolas had been productive over the last few albums, but this was the first casualty of the new path that Young was going down. Young decided to part ways with him. The volume dealers were no more. As the new decade dawned, Young now only wanted one thing, and that was to get Crazy Horse and David Briggs back together to make a new record. At the start of 1990, Neil Young was in a better position than he had been in years. Unlike all his previous albums through the 1980s, his latest album, Freedom, was both a commercial and a critical success, and he had stormed back onto television with his electrifying Saturday Night Live performance. So, naturally, in typical Neil Young style, he ditched the producer that he'd made the record with, and all but one of the musicians he had used over the last 2 albums. As the new decade dawned, Young wanted only one thing: to make a new record with his old friends David Briggs and Crazy Horse. Starting to compile material for his massive archives project, Young had been sifting through old footage of he and the Horse playing together in 1976 and was blown away by how loose and free they used to play together. Young wondered if they could ever get that way again. David Briggs had been at the Saturday Night Live performance in New York in September of '89, but it had been Nico Bolas who had engineered the sound and helped choose the band members for that night. Young and Briggs' relationship had always been rocky, but had taken a serious nosedive during the 1986 tour and subsequent live album that was recorded on that tour. Tensions between the band and the crew had often erupted, and Briggs had ended up leaving the tour early. Now, with Young wanting to make amends and make a new record, Briggs laid down the law. "I want you to understand that you're just one of the band," Briggs said to Young. "If you start trying to produce the record, I'll be gone. If you start trying to arrange the record, I will leave. Your only jobs will be to be songwriter, guitarist and singer." Young agreed, and arranged a meeting with the members of Crazy Horse and Briggs at a restaurant in California. After the tensions and rows of the '86 tour, Billy Talbot and Ralph Molina were both very ready to say no in a heartbeat to Neil if he didn't make the right noises. At the meeting, Young apologised to the band for his previous misuse of them and told them about his desire for them to get back playing like they had done in '76, whatever it took. Ralph said that Young told them to do whatever you got to do. If you were smoking pot, then go ahead and do it. Young went further and assigned all the blame for past wrongdoings to himself in a blatant attempt to assuage all their doubts, and basically said everything that they wanted to hear in order to just get the horse going again. They only had one stipulation, that they don't record the new album at Young's ranch. Instead, they wanted it to be on neutral territory. Young acceded to this as well, and his conciliatory words worked. In April of 1990, Neil Young and Crazy Horse with David Briggs began working on a new album, although Young instantly reneged on his promise not to record at the ranch, as the entire album ended up being recorded at the ranch. As with the rockier songs from Freedom, the band was recorded live, playing in one of Young's equipment barns on his ranch. For this album, Briggs and Young returned to the recording method employed on the Tonight's the Night album. Briggs was stationed outside in a remote truck and would record everything that the band played. Literally everything. If you miss one note Neil plays, he said, I guarantee you that will be the opening note of the song that he wants to use. If he walks back in 3 weeks and you can't play it back, you're gone. The barn was the antithesis of the modern recording studio. The space acted as a giant amp that became swamped with feedback from all the noise. Briggs' engineer, John Hanlon, desperately tried to get some sort of separation by gluing plexiglass sheets onto the sides of the drum kit, but Young complained that they were blocking the sound of Poncho's guitar, so they were taken off after only one song. I had vocals coming out of the kick drum mic, Hanlon said, feeding back into the PA. Everything else, it was an exercise in leakage, swim and wash. The band played a set of songs twice a day for a couple of weeks, never repeating the same songs in one set. Also, like they had done during the recording of Tonight's the Night, Young decided that no one would listen to anything that they'd done so far until the entire thing was done, including himself. In doing so, he freed himself and the band from worrying about the recording process, to the point where they forgot they were even recording at all. The results were the freest rock record Young and the Horse had made since Zuma. In terms of the songs, at first the new songs were only half formed, and a lot of them still had unfinished lyrics. Briggs suggested then that instead they try to warm up by running through some old unreleased songs from the 70s, like Country Home, White Line. These ended up coming out so well, they ended up being the opening 2 songs on the finished album. 2 of the songs recorded featured extended jams that stretched the songs out to be on 10 minutes each, harking back to the album Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere in 1969. Young acknowledged the comparison between the 2 albums, stating, yeah, it's probably closer to that record than anything else I've done. Young said the long jams were a deliberate choice, because he wasn't hearing that anywhere else at the time. There's nothing spontaneous going on records these days, he said to Rolling Stone, except in blues and funkier music. Rock and roll used to have all that, and after spending the whole of the 1980s in complete thrall to them, he was now finally shedding all the synthesizers, drum machines, MIDI machines and whatnot that he had been forcing the members of Crazy Horse to play with on their previous tours and in their previous recording sessions in the 80s, driving them all mad in the process. We just played like a band, he said. You just can't get that old-time vibrating feelings with machines. That happens with musicians who just love to play and improvise together. The final day of the recording yielded 4 songs that ended up being on the album. One of them was not just recorded in one take, but it had not even been rehearsed. The album version is literally the first run-through with the band of the song. According to guitarist Poncho, it came about when he asked Young, hey, why don't we play something that you played in your first band when you were just starting out? Something different, just to be loose. Young then launched straight into the opening chords of Farmer John, a song Young had played as a teenager in his first band, The Squires. Originally by R&B duo Don and Dewey, who was also recorded in the 60s by The Searchers, and garage rock band The Premiers. Its inclusion on the album was inspired, as the song was actually one of the founding stones of Young's guitar style. It was the very first song that when he played it live with a band back in 1964, he found he could improvise a solo and that the band could follow him as well. We kept that song going for 10 minutes, said the Squires drummer Bill Edmondson. People didn't want it to end. Young said later, that's when I started to realise I had the capacity to lose my mind when playing music and not just play the song and be cool. More than just a throwaway cover then, Farmer John is one of the historical building blocks of Young's multifaceted musical attack. The version recorded at the ranch 25 years later in one take was rightly given pride of place right there in the middle of the album. When you're 42, singing Farmer John, I'm in love with your daughter, bassist Billy Talbot said, it's going to sound like dirty old men. Indeed, but as Young's biographer Jimmy McDonough said, but these were joyous, dirty old men. The term ragged glory, never has an album title been more apt to describe the music contained within it, applies to no song better than it applies to this version of Farmer John. It's glorious, it's ragged, it's wrong, but it's so right. One song that was fully formed going into the recording was Fucking Up. Young had played it during the warm-up for the Saturday Night Live performance. This song, among others on the album, mark a return to a more personal songwriting, after the more state-of-the-world type songs on Freedom. In this song, the blame for the fucked upness of everything is squarely apportioned to himself and no one else. Only I can bring you down, he sings. Why do I keep fucking up? Love to Burn finds Young going even deeper into himself, imploring himself to stay open and not shut down emotionally like he'd done 10 years earlier. It's that moment when you're sitting there going, I got a lot to give, he said later. You just gotta stay open and not shut down because of all the bad stories, life stories and bad news movies. Where you taking my kid? Why'd you ruin my life? Young cries, and you get the feeling that that's not just a turn of phrase, but something that was said in real life at some point. It's no coincidence that Love to Burn is the second longest jam on the album. The guitar solo explores the depths beyond the words. Young used the band like the vessel in Fantastic Voyage, taking a trip deep inside, wrote Jimmy McDonough in his biography Shaky. The longest song, Love and Only Love, is a more defiant and optimistic version of Love to Burn. Spirit, come back to me, give me strength and set me free, he sings. Love is not only worth taking a chance on, it's the only thing that endures. Hate is everything you think it is. Love and only love will break it down. Some of the songs are more wistful, looking back at life from the vantage point of being in your mid-40s, most obviously on Days That Used to Be, which deliberately used the same melody as Bob Dylan's looking back song, My Back Pages. In Mansion on the Hill, Young has a vision of a hippie utopia, far away from the road of tears, up on a hill somewhere. Maybe he was thinking back to Laurel Canyon in the late 60s, where he had first met Crazy Horse when they were still called the Rockets. It's a place where psychedelic music fills the air, and where peace and love still live. It's a fantasy, but for the duration of the song, it becomes a temporary reality for everyone who can feel it. Anyone who's open to it. Over and Over is probably the most overt love song on the album, a celebration of a relationship that endures and finds fresh joy in repeating the same experiences, whether physical or emotional, over and over again together. It's clearly addressed to his wife, Peggy, at the time, but it could also just as easily apply to his musical relationship with Crazy Horse, as that went back even further, of course. And now the feeling's just the same, over and over again. Mother Earth, Natural Anthem, was recorded live at Farm Aid on April the 7th, 1990, in Indianapolis. Singing solo with his electric guitar, Crazy Horse then overdubbed the harmonies later at the ranch. The song uses the melody of the traditional British folk song The Water Is Wide, recorded by the Seekers and many others in the 1960s. I used different chords and screwed around with it, he said later. The folk process. I'm just an old folkie. Overall, the tone of the album was much more hopeful than Freedom, offering a way through the world of hate by reminding us to stay open to the possibility of love in the natural world, a world away from the road of tears, and with enough self-examination to take stock of everything you have left to give. After its release in September of 1990, like Freedom, Ragged Glory was a critical smash, with rave reviews across the board. I guess Neil Young is the king of rock and roll, wrote Kurt Loder in his Rolling Stone review. Calling the album a great one, he said, I don't see anybody else on the scene standing anywhere near this tall. these days, and the album proved to be a huge influence on the guitar music of the 1990s, particularly for much younger indie bands. The previous year had seen the release of a tribute album called The Bridge, a tribute to Neil Young, featuring covers by the likes of Dinosaur Jr., Sonic Youth, Nick Cave and the Pixies. So Young now found himself positioned as a prime influence on a whole generation of alternative rock and indie artists who, if they weren't citing him as a direct influence, were definitely taking notes. But Neil Young wasn't being crowned the godfather of grunge just yet by the media. Grunge was not yet a thing in the mainstream. Nirvana's Nevermind would not be released until a whole year later, and before then Neil Young and Crazy Horse would embark on a huge tour across the USA, much bigger than the previous one in 1986. To warm up for the tour, the band played 2 shows in November in California, one at the Mountain House in Woodside and one at the Catalyst in Santa Cruz. The latter show was recorded and filmed and was later released as Way Down in the Rust Bucket in 2021. Playing many of the Ragged Glory songs for the first time live, the set also included many rarely played classics such as Homegrown, Danger Bird and Surfer Joe, and also a very rare outing for the most demented Crazy Horse jam ever, T-Bone. Upon its release in 2021, Poncho described this album as the best Crazy Horse record we ever recorded. I love this record. Neil plays great, unbelievably great. He's just electrified. He's completely correct, of course. Rust Bucket is a fantastic document of that moment in time, and although supposedly a warm-up for the tour that followed, most of these songs would actually not be played on the tour. It was all about the beginning of a new era, said Poncho. We were becoming alive. I don't see it as a warm-up. It doesn't hit me like that. Rust Bucket is vintage Horse, but in 1991 everything would blow up again as the band embarked on a massive 53-date tour. At the end of 1990, Neil Young and Crazy Horse had played 2 shows in California as a warm-up for their forthcoming tour that seemed to give a good indication of what that tour would be like. A chance to kick back and play some of the new Ragged Glory songs, and mixing in a whole bunch of fan favourite obscurities from days gone by. The live album, Way Down in the Rust Bucket, released years later, gives you the flavour of these shows. Opening with Country Home, a joyful Neil and the Horse took great pleasure in revisiting forgotten treasures like Danger Bird and Surfer Joe. However, less than a week before the Smell the Horse tour was due to begin, on the 17th of January 1991, the United States of America launched Operation Desert Storm with an aerial bombing campaign against Iraq in response to their invasion of Kuwait. Neil Young spent every spare moment he had watching the coverage of the war on CNN and felt he had to make some adjustments to the upcoming tour in order, he said, to reflect my anxieties and attempt to exorcise the demons of my own comprehension of the people who were dying as we were playing. The thought of simply going out onto the road to merely entertain was no longer an option, so Young focused more energy into the songs that dealt with conflict like Powderfinger and Cortez the Killer, and also with new songs such as Love and Only Love and Love to Burn. The themes of these songs were given added poignancy as the Gulf War raged on every night through the TV tube. I figured the guitar playing was a soundtrack for CNN, he said later. Young also added a cover of Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind to the set, performed in the style of Mother Earth from Ragged Glory on the electric guitar. How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer is Blowin' in the Wind. Usually performed as the 3rd song in the set after Crime in the City, air raid sirens and machine gun fire would herald the start of the song, and the classic melody would start smouldering through Young's old black and monster guitar rig. It was an undeniably potent and powerful addition to the set. Building on the noisy foundations laid down by the previous Young and the Restless shows of 1989, Neil Young and Crazy Horse, live in 1991, was a sonic behemoth on a scale never before seen by even the diehards in Neil Young's fan base. Resurrecting the oversized amplifier props from Rust Never Sleeps, these shielded the audience from seeing what was actually making all that noise coming from the stage. Inside those giant fake stacks, Young had his own private PA with 2,000 watts of power, According to guitar tech Larry Cragg, a couple of times I had to take out my earplugs to hear what was going on, he said, and it just killed my ears. And here Neil was, with this thing pointed straight at him. What also tied back to Rust Never Sleeps was that they were now opening every show with Hey Hey My Into the Black. This was also a statement of intent. They could have easily opened with Country Home, like in the previous November shows, but Young now knew they couldn't mess around. The shows were purposefully intense right from the opening notes. Another aspect of the tour that prevented it from becoming just another aging rocker on a nostalgia tour was the choice of support acts. Manager Elliot Roberts booked indie noise rock pioneers Sonic Youth and the rockabilly-tinged punk band Social Distortion as the opening acts. Sonic Youth were Neil Young fans, and Kim Gordon from the band had a weirdly personal connection. She had actually known Bruce Berry back in the 70s. It was a bold choice of openers that tested the open-mindedness of Neil Young's fans to the extreme. Sonic Youth especially received a decidedly mixed reception from the crowd, with their lengthy, droning feedback solos and detuned guitars. If you watch clips from these shows on YouTube, you can hear about half and half boos and cheers after they finish each song. It was an inspired choice to have them on the tour though, as Neil Young and Crazy Horse could make just as much racket, and served as a reminder to the audience that rock and roll needed to be rejuvenated on a regular basis in order to keep the thing alive at all. But did Neil Young actually like Sonic Youth? Well, this is a quote from the man himself. "Obviously, I like Sonic Youth. They're definitely a modern rock and roll band in my eyes. They make some beautiful music. Have you heard Expressway to Your Skull? It's unbelievably good. Magnificent melody, and to hear it live, it's awesome. They have several songs of that quality, so they're a great band." And he also said, "I didn't want acts that people were going to say, oh, I can take them or leave them. I wanted to get something that people were going to either love or hate, and I think we did a good job there. Sonic Youth are way out there on the cutting edge of what they're doing, and," he said, "it's also extremely similar to what we've been doing for a long time." The sound crew, unfortunately, did not share the same enthusiasm for the opening acts, and did not allow Sonic Youth to utilise the full PA during their set, so they wouldn't seem as loud as Neil Young Crazy Horse when they finally came on. Despite this, Sonic Youth were very grateful for the experience of playing to a much larger, more mainstream crowd than they'd ever played for before, and the association with them for Young helped to consolidate his image in the media as one of the very few artists remaining from the 60s to still retain an underground edge 25 years later. The Gulf War wasn't the only fighting that was taking place during the tour. This was, after all, a Neil Young and Crazy Horse tour, and David Briggs was there as well. Things kicked off in Philadelphia when there were sound problems. Young was angry at Briggs. Briggs was pissed at Billy Talbot, who had been messing around with the onstage monitors. Briggs unleashed his full anger on the bass player and caused a scene so bad, Young told Briggs he had to leave. "You never know which Briggs you're gonna get," said Poncho. "The big-hearted Briggs, or the stay-up-all-night drinking, doing cocaine and screaming 'fuck you' Briggs." Things got heated between the band members too, as in Vancouver. Apparently not happy with his band's performance, Young kicked Billy in the ass during Love and Only Love, of all things. Backstage, Ralph Molina later screamed in Young's face, "This is becoming like a CSNY tour." In spite of all this, musically, the tour produced some of the best performances from Young and the Horse in over a decade, and having recorded every show and done extensive filming, after the tour they had a wealth of material to mix down into a live album and make a concert movie as well. After being unhappy with the first attempt at mixing, which had taken place at Indigo Studio, Young and Briggs attempted another mix at Young's Ranch, and this is where the shit really hit the fan. As Young agonised over the mix and the weeks dragged on, Briggs had to start postponing other work commitments that he had, until one day, with no end in sight still, Briggs confronted Young about it. They got into a massive argument, ending in the pair passionately exchanging fuck yous, and with Briggs getting in his car and driving off. Without Briggs, Young and Billy Talbot finished mixing the album, which was released in October of 1991 under the name of Weld, comprising 2 CDs. This was the most complete document thus far of a Neil Young and Crazy Horse show that had been released, and unlike almost any other Neil Young release up until that point, it contained no acoustic or piano songs, just a back-to-back all-out electric assault. For the completists and the noise fanatics, there was another edition of the album called Weld, which was 3 CDs, one CD just being called Arc, which consisted of just one 35-minute long track of feedback, guitar noise, improvisations and vocal fragments, all culled from the tour's live recordings. Arc was inspired by a suggestion from Sonic Youth's Thurston Moore, who said after viewing Young's tour documentary Muddy Track, said that he should release an album that sounded like that, of just the beginnings and ends of songs, with feedback and all recorded highly compressed through a video camera microphone. There was nothing lo-fi about Arc, it was taken from the multi-track board recordings, but if it was reminiscent of anything, it was Lou Reed's mid-70s avant-garde Metal Machine music. And this further cemented Young's position as an artist still willing, in his mid-40s, for better or worse, to take risks. Weld itself is one of the very best Neil Young live albums, or just Neil Young albums period. It was one of the very first ones that I listened to, actually. After Harvest, I think I listened to this one next. So it was these versions of My Hey Hey, Like a Hurricane, Cortez the Killer that I heard before the original versions. And do you know what? It's not a bad place to start, because they are absolutely stellar versions. The brilliant thing about using Weld as a starting point for Neil Young and Crazy Horse is that it is a great compilation of songs performed by a band at one of their peaks, with just the right balance of being faithful to the originals mixed with just the right amount of improvisation. The Weld concert video, interestingly, retains the original mixes done by John Hanlon and David Briggs at Indigo Studios, and also contains a slightly different track listing. It also features, very prominently, members of the audience going absolutely mental to Hey Hey My and other songs, like this lady and this guy, which give the film a kind of sociological aspect that makes it even more fascinating. I wonder what that lady's up to now. Jimmy McDonough, in his book Shaky, said that when future races want to look back on the obsessive relationship between artist and audience in the rock era, this is one document they will want to peruse. The Weld video still is, to my mind, probably the best live document of Neil Young and Crazy Horse available. Even better than Rust Never Sleeps, maybe. It's 2 hours of pure unadulterated horse. After being released on video and Laserdisc in the 90s, it was never officially re-released on DVD, so by the time I came to be aware of it and actually want to see it, it was the 2000s, and it wasn't that easy to get hold of. So I had to make do with downloading a low-res digital copy of it that had been transferred from a wobbly VHS. But it was no less thrilling, despite the aspect ratio being all fucked and pixelated. After the release of Weld, Arc, and the Weld video, Young's relationship with David Briggs was again in the toilet. I don't know what's happened to the guy, Briggs said shortly after. I don't know what's happening to his life, his mind, and in all honesty, I don't give a shit. Of course, in about 18 months' time, they would be right back working together, best of friends. But before then, having just released his heaviest and loudest live album to date, coming off the back of a grueling, eardrum-punishing 50-plus date tour, standing in front of giant stacks with screaming feedback ringing through his head, Young was about to do another one of his infamous 180s. The next album, Young said, would be the quietest record I've ever made. And this wasn't just a stylistic choice. The Weld tour, and all the previous decades of playing incredibly loud guitar through giant speakers, had left Young with a condition called hyperacusis, a condition characterized by a heightened sensitivity to everyday noises, where normal sounds are perceived as excessively loud, uncomfortable, or even painful. So Crazy Horse were again put out to pasture, and just as the rock world was becoming grungified, Nirvana's Nevermind was also released in the fall of 1991. Young, of course, decided to go fully to the opposite end of the spectrum, reuniting with many of his old friends from the Harvest days and making some of the most gorgeous and, quite frankly, romantic, softest soft rock that ever softed. In In 1991, the sheer volume of the Weld tour and subsequent prolonged mixing debacle for the live album left Neil Young with an acute hearing condition known as hyperacusis, a heightened sensitivity to everyday noises, making them painfully loud. As a result, Young retreated back to his acoustic guitar for the remainder of the year. In November, he played at the 5th annual Bridge School concert, the annual fundraising benefit concert Young had first organised back in 1986 to help children with speech and physical impairments. That year's concert saw Young playing a couple of new songs from Hank to Hendrix and Harvest Moon. Recording a new batch of songs had already begun back in September of 91 at Young's ranch. Engineer John Nowland had never worked with Young before and underwent something of a trial by fire, as when Young entered the studio, when Nowland was just still getting ready, he immediately started playing the song Silver and Gold, as Nowland was still adjusting the levels, making sure the guitar tone was okay. That's about halfway through the song. He hit the talkback button, interrupting Young as he was playing the song, and said, "Okay, we're all set to go now. Are you ready to go?" "It was like the speakers froze," he said later. Neil said, "I've been trying to record that song for 10 years, and that was the take." Nowland learned the hard way that if Neil was in the studio, you had to be rolling tape from second 1, just in case the next thing that he played was the take. He soon got his act together and recorded a bunch of new songs with Young, all of which he assumed were just acoustic demos, but in fact some of these takes ended up being used on the finished album. Seeking a warmer, more intimate sound, Young began using more analog gear again, vintage mics, and even going to the trouble of building an actual physical echo chamber rather than use digital reverb. The new songs were quieter, softer and more personal. So Young took the decision to reassemble as best he could the musicians who had played on the Harvest album back in 1972. The Stray Gators, Tim Drummond on bass, Ben Keith on steel, Kenny Buttery on drums, and even used the harmonies of Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor again. Jack Nietzsche also returned to the fold to arrange the strings for the song Such a Woman. Young also included more female harmonies with Nicolette Larson and his sister Astrid Young. There's a lot more feminine representation on this record than there has been on any of my recent records, he said. I wanted to feel the feminine side of the content of the songs. By using the same musicians from Harvest, and with the album being mainly acoustic, with all quite personal songs about relationships mostly, Young was finally making what people have been waiting for, a kind of sequel to his best-selling album from 1972. In classic Neil Young style, though, he made people wait 20 years for it. He also denied it was a deliberate move. "The songs made me do it," he said in an interview with Rolling Stone in 1992. The idea, Young said, was to sing about the same subject matter, but with 20 years more experience. The songs themselves weren't all new. You and Me actually dates from around 1971, as Young sang a few lines from the song at a concert that year in Los Angeles as part of the intro to I Am a Child. Unknown Legend had been around for years, unfinished, until he found the half-written lyrics and decided to finish it. One of These Days and Dreaming Man were also from the 80s, but the rest of the songs were new. Instead of deploying his usual method of recording very quickly and then just moving on, Young worked on this album for months. A lifetime in the world of Neil Young album making. Harvest Moon, as the album came to be called, was unusually for Young, painstakingly handcrafted in a way not seen since perhaps his debut solo album. But unlike that first solo album, where yet to find his true voice and approach to his music, he had overcompensated with wall-to-wall overdubs and over-the-top arrangements, Harvest Moon is a lesson in understatement and minimalism. The playing of Ben Keith and Spooner Oldham on the songs is so understated that at times you barely notice it, but you can always feel it's there, and it's always completely in service of the song. Young's biographer Jimmy McDonough describes Unknown Legend as perhaps the most empathetic portrait of a woman Young has ever created. Young had indeed met Peggy when she was working in a diner in 1974, as he wrote in his memoir, Special Deluxe. Back in 1974, there was a bar up on Skyline Boulevard, he said, California Highway 35, located on the ridge above the ranch. It was called Alex's, and Peggy was working there. Alex's was the place where I used to order just to watch her walk across the floor. After rediscovering his handwritten lyrics to the song, written on an old newspaper, Young picked up his old Martin D28, the one formerly owned by Hank Williams, and finished the song on the spot, remembering the melody and chords he had in mind for it as if it was yesterday. The song flowed as if it had always been there, he said. From Hank to Hendrix distills the theme of the album into one song. How do you keep going? How do you keep an old relationship new? Can you make love last? And can you bring the past with you? The song uses cultural references to measure time, from Marilyn to Madonna, from Hank to Hendrix, to convey the lasting nature of this love. Interestingly, it's an open-ended question whether the Hank of the title is Hank Williams, which would be the obvious choice, or whether it is in fact another Hank who had a profound influence on Neil Young's guitar style, Hank Marvin, lead guitarist from the British instrumental group The Shadows. Hank Marvin's melodic phrasing, with clear, ringing notes, can be heard echoing throughout Neil Young's guitar playing, even if at times it's often clad thickly in distortion, and Hank Marvin would make sense in terms of the title, as both Hank Marvin and Jimi Hendrix are both lead guitar players. On the other hand, some would argue it has to be Williams, as Young does own Hank's old guitar, and he even uses that phrase in the song lyrics as well. And maybe Hank Williams and Jimi Hendrix represent the two main divergent musical directions Young likes to take throughout his career. One acoustic, more country and folk based, the other fully amplified electric rock. Also of interest is the fact that the relationship described in the song does not appear to be about Young's relationship with his then wife, Peggy. The couple in the song are headed for the big divorce, California style. Or maybe it is. Young himself says there's a whole bunch of things in there. You're constantly wondering which way things are going to go, whether it's going to last or going to explode. Like all relationships, Young's relationship with Peggy had its up and downs, and eventually it did end in divorce, but not until 2014. You and Me was a song from the 70s, but Young abandoned the song in that decade after Tim Drummond, bass player from the Harvest album, enthusiastically told him that the song reminded him of the Harvest songs and that they should do it. Young immediately shelved the song. I got spooked by it, he said, because someone said what it was before we did it. I don't want to feel like I'm just filling in the numbers. The title track, Harvest Moon, is perhaps the most straight-up love song in Young's whole catalogue. He confirmed just as much in a 2021 post on his website. Harvest Moon is a song I wrote for Peggy, my wife of many years, who gave me two beautiful children and helped bring up my first child, Zeke. She was a dancer and floated around when she was happy. Musically, the song, well, the main riff anyway, is clearly inspired by the Everly Brothers' 1961 hit Walk Right Back, and has become one of his most popular songs to this day. One of those songs of his that has gotten a whole life of its own, being widely covered by various artists and become the favourite song of people who aren't even necessarily fans of Neil Young. Natural Beauty was recorded live, then overdubbed in the studio, in a way reminiscent of Will to Love from the American Stars and Bars album, only with female harmonies this time. The song's lyrics both eulogise a woman's beauty and the beauty of the natural world at the same time. A natural beauty should be preserved like a monument to nature. Again, can we make it last like a musical ride? The song also contains a reference to his use of digital studio tricks in the 80s. I heard a perfect echo die into an anonymous wall of digital sound somewhere deep inside of my soul. Young was by now walking right back from being all in on the new digital technology of the 1980s, and was now trying to bring back the warmer sounds of records made with analog equipment in the 60s and 70s. Such a Woman is a collaboration with Jack Nietzsche, featuring an 18-piece string section, but unlike the songs A Man Needs a Maid and There's a World from Harvest, Such a Woman manages to avoid sounding too overwrought or melodramatic. It soars with simple lyrics that benefit from not trying to be clever or complex for their own sake. No one else can kill me like you do, and no one else can feel our pain. The song drew mixed responses from people. Jack Nietzsche himself criticised the mixing of the song on the album. Live, the strings were beautiful, he said. So much dynamic range, but when I hear the record, I think, what did he do? David Briggs, not involved in the production of this record at all, thought it sucked. One of the most trite, meaningless songs Neil's ever written, he said after the release of the album. However, in my opinion, I think this is just behind Unknown Legend as the greatest tribute Young could pay to his wife at the time. And despite the epic string arrangement, it still manages to sound intimate. When Harvest Moon was released on November the 20th, 1992, 20 years after Harvest, not all the critics were jazzed about it. The usually very enthusiastic Paul Williams said it lacked vulnerability and it just doesn't deliver. Jimmy McDonough, in his book Shaky, is very lukewarm on the album, calling the song Harvest Moon bland and describing the album as a whole obtuse and impenetrable. In my opinion, these are bizarre takes on an album that I think does actually show a lot of vulnerability, emotional openness, and some of Young's most direct and least obtuse and impenetrable lyrics, especially songs like, One of These Days, Old King, Unknown Legend, Harvest Moon, Such a Woman, You and Me, but okay. However, overall, not only was it received actually quite positively by most reviewers, it was a huge hit with the public, aided by the MTV friendly video for Harvest Moon. The album went platinum within 3 months of its release. Harvest Moon has in fact stood the test of time very well, and I consider it to be one of his very best albums. So yes, I do think it is an underrated masterpiece. The time of the album's release was also, of course, the height of not only grunge, but the height of Young being called the Godfather of grunge by the media. Not just Nirvana, but now legions of bands were all over MTV and the radio, and they all seemed to dress like Neil Young circa 1971. Flannel shirts, jeans, scruffy long hair. The previous year's Weld live album and tour had, welded him into that place at the top of the grunge hierarchy. So now he was all too happy to completely confound everybody's expectations by releasing a very quiet, introspective, intimate album tinged with country and folk influences. I'm entering my Perry Como phase, he said with a wry smile. People need to have a name, he said to Jimmy McDonough. They can't understand why I'm still here, so they call me the Godfather of grunge, because they think they can relate to that. Before the album was released though, from January to November 1992, Young had been playing solo gigs all over, which at first consisted mainly just of the Harvest Moon songs, even though the audience had not heard the album yet, much as he had done with the original Harvest and the Tonight's the Night albums. Towards the end of the year though, the set list got looser and looser until he was playing songs like World on a String, Speaking Out, and even older unreleased songs from the 70s like Home Fires, Hitchhiker and Depression Blues. It was also around this time that he started playing a version of Like a Hurricane solo on a pump organ, which was mesmerising. Young found on this tour that he had gained a new audience. These were young people who wanted me to do my hits, he said. Ragged Glory, Rockin' in the Free World. They wanted me to get out there and get really intense, but they didn't understand that I don't always do that. The fans who'd been around since the early 70s had learned the hard way again and again that he didn't always do that, or even anything that the audience actually wanted to hear. Now a whole new generation was being taught the same lesson in artistic autonomy that Young had made his whole reason for living. These new fans, however, would not be too put off by Young's seeming 180 in musical direction. After Harvest Moon had become a hit album, his old nemesis, MTV, invited Young to record an Unplugged show for their series of the same name. The Unplugged series was by now a huge deal. Eric Clapton's album of his performance had just won 6 Grammys and sold millions. It seemed like a no-brainer. Young's stock was high, his music perfect for the Unplugged concept, and he had gained a new resurgence in popularity with a younger MTV watching audience. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot actually. supposed to write. By 1992, Neil Young had reached another peak in his career. The erratic left and right turns of the 1980s were now a distant memory. The critics loved him again, and he was experiencing a new resurgence in popularity, with a new generation of fans who saw him as a kind of godfather to the new grunge scene. His latest album, Harvest Moon, was a step back from the grungy distortion of Ragged Glory and Weld into a more rootsy acoustic country sound, but his audience, young and old, was still right there with him. Due to all this, MTV considered Young to be a prime candidate for their Unplugged series, where beloved artists perform a special intimate concert for the cameras and a studio audience, stripping down their songs to acoustic bare bones. And it was proving to be a hugely successful format. Eric Clapton won 6 Grammys for his Unplugged album, and coming right after Harvest Moon, what could be more perfect than Neil Young now doing his own MTV Unplugged. December the 4th, 1992, Young brought the Stray Gators, featuring Spooner Oldham, Nils Lofgren, Nicolette Larson, and his sister, Astrid Young, to the famous Ed Sullivan Theatre in New York, and a rehearsal took place for the next day's taping. According to Astrid Young in her memoir, Being Young, we rehearsed that night, and it was pure magic, relaxed, and totally in the pocket. It sounded great. However, when it came to the actual show the next day, something seemed off right from the start. According to his sister, Young was still getting over a cold and had tried various remedies before playing, including hot water with lemon, steam, vocal warm-ups, and even a little bit of the old... But apparently as soon as he started playing the first song, which was Love is a Rose, things seemed not quite right. The room sounded different, she said. There just wasn't the warmth and enveloping depth to it anymore. Acoustically, the room was different now, of course. It was now packed with 500 people sat watching. So Young stopped the song halfway through and started it again. We're taping this, right? He said. Okay, I'll start again. And then during the second song, Unknown Legend, it became apparent the backing vocals were too loud, so again, the song was stopped and started again. Things went from bad to worse after that, said Astrid Young. Seemingly unable to shake off the bad vibes, Young decided to take the mid-set break a lot earlier than planned, and was the first one to get off the stage and shoot up the stairs to the dressing room. And it was at this time that Astrid Young went back to her dressing room and discovered that someone had been in there and stolen her wallet. The whole night was crumbling around me, she said. There was a sudden lack of ambience in our world. Young was in a foul mood by now. Tim Mulligan tried to reassure him that it was just the audience filling the room that was making the acoustics seem off. Young took a moment to breathe, and then they went back out for the second set. The mix continued to be a problem in the second half. The vocals were either too loud or too quiet. Songs were stopped and started several times, and the atmosphere of the show became rife with tension. Towards the end of the second set, he was still so unhappy that after one of the songs, he just got up and left the theatre through the stage door and went out onto the street. After being persuaded to come back in and finish the show, he treated the audience to his first performance of Last Trip to Tulsa in 16 years, and then finished with a rendition of After the Gold Rush on the pump organ. Astrid Young said it was such a relief when the whole thing was over. A few weeks after the taping, after the show had been mixed and edited into a perfectly acceptable whole, with all the awkward and ugly bits chopped out, Young wanted to scrap the whole thing. He hated his own performance, the mix, the vocals, everything. There was just one problem though. It was owned by MTV. They had paid for it, so it was theirs to broadcast to millions. Young, of course, wasn't having any of that, so he then bought the show back from MTV with his own money and offered to do another one instead, on another date at a different location. MTV accepted this, and a couple of months later, in February 1993, Young and the same personnel arrived at Universal Studios in Los Angeles for Unplugged. Take 2. Again, they rehearsed during the day this time, and again, things went perfectly alright. Young then went back to his hotel room for a nap and planned to come back just before showtime. In the build-up towards showtime, however, things began to unravel again. Bassist Tim Drummond and drummer Kenny Buttery got into a row with Young's manager, Elliot Roberts, over the money they were getting. Drummond and Buttery argued that Eric Clapton's band, for his Unplugged show, had gotten triple scale, plus bonuses for when the subsequent album went gold and platinum, so why shouldn't they be getting the same? By the time Young arrived back from his nap, ready for the show, he walked into the middle of Roberts, Drummond, Buttrey and David Briggs, all having a massive row. It was reminiscent of the Time Fades Away era, when similar demands for more money had soured the vibe of that tour. Any good vibes that had been built up during the afternoon's rehearsal had now been completely shattered. Astrid Young says she and Nicolette Larson sat in the green room expecting to hear any minute that they had all been fired and the show was cancelled. However, this did not happen. Instead, Young dropped a completely different kind of bombshell. He handed out completely new set lists to everyone. The first half of the show was now going to be solo acoustic, no band. Then, new songs that had not even been rehearsed were added to the second set. Astrid Young recalled that Comes a Time was now in the second set, and I didn't know the words or the parts. Young did the first half of the show, one of the more intense sets I've ever seen him deliver, said his sister. Towards the end of the set, Young got Nils Lofgren, Larson and his sister to join him to do Helpless, and it's a great version, featuring Young on piano, Lofgren on accordion, with Nicolette and Astrid providing sweet backing vocals. Astrid said Young even cracked a smile at this point, which helped to dissipate some of the tension which had riven the atmosphere up until this point. The rest of the band then came out for the second set, and for some obscure reason that I couldn't find on Google involving the musicians union, drummer Kenny Buttrey could not appear on camera, so played his drums and you can't really see his face at any point during the show. He was credited on the subsequent album under the alias Oscar Butterworth. According to Astrid Young, during the performance, the rapport between Neil and his rhythm section was venomous from the start. Tim Drummond barely looked up from the floor for the duration. Young shot daggers at them both while singing certain lines, such as during Look Out for My Love, when he glares at Buttrey singing the line, "There's a weight on you, but you can't feel it." Amazingly, despite the bad vibes, the band managed to get through the second set without having to restart any of the songs, although the tension never let up. When watching the MTV broadcast of the show, it is hard to detect anything untoward or amiss there at all. Musically, the band are on good form, with great versions of Harvest Moon, Unknown Legend, Look Out for My Love, and all the rest. For me, the best one is Transformer Man, which is transformed from its early 80s synth and vocoder straitjacket into a lush, open, warm acoustic rush of female harmonies and rich instrumentation, including Nils Lofgren playing an auto harp and Spooner Oldham in the background playing the pump organ to great effect. In fact, Spooner Oldham adds so much depth to these arrangements without you even realising that he's there half the time. Most of the time he is off to the side, not even on camera most of the time, but there's no mistaking there's some intangible ingredient being added into the mix. You can barely sense it, but it's definitely there. They also gave Sample and Hold the same treatment during the taping of the show, but it was not included in either the MTV show or the subsequent album, which is a shame as it shines in the same way as Transformer Man and reminds you that the trans songs are actually rather good. Harvest Moon is a highlight as well, with the live broom sweeping during the song, surely a first for MTV at that point. The solo songs are also great, with a satisfying mix of the familiar and obscure and even more obscure, unreleased in fact. In the case of String Man, which Young casually performed as if it were just another song on Harvest Moon. String Man is, in my opinion, one of Young's best songs, one that stands the test of time and reveals multiple layers when given proper scrutinisation. Young says that it was written for Jack Nietzsche, who was undergoing a traumatic divorce at the time when it was written in the mid-70s. I'm singing for the string man who lately lost his wife, no dearer friend of mine that I know in this life. So it's about divorce, but it's also about lost souls. And interestingly, Young holds up a perhaps surprising example to illustrate this theme. The simple case, he sings, of the Sarge who can't go back to war because the hippies tore down everything he was fighting for. It's worth remembering that not all Neil Young songs about war are just straightforward protest songs. There's songs like this also, with a more subtle perspective, that peer into the souls of the warmongers themselves. Just like his love songs range from simple, heartfelt, celebratory declarations to more nuanced, seemingly contradictory and self-doubting songs about relationships, his war songs also span a similar range of complexity. Love and War being two sides of the same human coin, often permeate the songs and intermingle with each other, like they do here. The stringman of the song is both a violinist seeking to alleviate the chaos in his head and a puller of strings, a human puppeteer, no longer in command of his little wooden soldiers. Perhaps the best solo performance of the show, he sings it with a feeling that's not quite present in the other songs. Like with many of Young's unreleased songs, the chorus melody found its way into another, at the time, unreleased song, Hitchhiker, which then again later found its way into the chorus of Like an Inca. The Youngism, it's all one song, does seem to very much ring true when you're closely following the lineage of these songs. Young has done this multiple times throughout his catalogue, often very much on purpose, and it's something we will return to in future videos, especially the next one. The version of Like a Hurricane on a pump organ is absolutely glorious, and what could be a more appropriate song to play on an instrument that creates sound by pumping air? Young's organ is an Este reed organ from 1885, and it creates a warm string-like sound with vibrating brass reeds, powered by 2 foot pedals, housed in an ornate Gothic Victorian cabinet. He's also used it multiple times in other live situations for other songs such as Mother Earth, for example. I love the way this thing starts honking as soon as he sits down and starts playing it. It's both unearthly and organic, ugly and beautiful, all at the same time. And as he plays a harmonica solo during the song as well, he's also technically using the movement of air to play 2 instruments on the song, a song that uses the movement of air as a metaphor. So if that doesn't win you over, I don't know what will. The Unplugged album was released in June 1993 to a generally warm critical reception, although the review in Rolling Stone noted that it felt like Young was just coasting in a comfort zone of friendly fireside folk sing that could use a shot of ragged glory. Given all the context of the turmoil leading up to the performance, it's not hard to see that it affected the songs. Young only smiles like 1 or 2 times during the whole show, so did he even want to do this unplugged thing in the first place? The answer, of course, is no. No, he didn't. According to his manager, Elliot Roberts, it was another one of those things that I forced him to do. He had almost backed out of the first taping at the last minute, having second thoughts going in was never going to end well, and as we've seen, the first show ended up being completely scrapped. The second show turned out to be more acceptable to Young, but knowing all this context, seeing Young singing Mr. Soul and World on a String the way he does during the show, you do kind of get the feeling that he didn't really want to be there. So although this is a treat for the fans and viewers of MTV, it's all very musically worthwhile. There was no escaping the fact that now there was an MTV logo on the back of one of Neil Young's albums. Back in 1988, Young had kicked MTV's ass all over the map with This Note's For You, wrote Jimmy McDonough in his biography, Shaky. Now he had conceded. The album was another hit, going gold in the November of 1993. So now Young had successfully ridden the MTV gravy train at his manager's behest. What was next? Whatever it was going to be, it was certainly not going to be involving the Stray Gators. After all this unplugged drama, Kenny Buttry said, "I never want to hear his name again. I will never ever play another Neil Young album on my stereo. I want it in capital letters that he is the hardest person to work with I've ever worked with in my life." Tim Drummond also never worked with Neil Young again. So instead, for his live shows in 1993, Young turned to another band, and it wasn't Crazy Horse. It was a band who were genuinely legendary in their own right, a band with history and who had had their own massive impact on the musical world. On his shoulder rests a violin, for his head where chaos reigns. In 1993, after recording the Unplugged show for MTV, Neil Young decided to go back out on the road with a band. However, this band was not going to be the Stray Gators. They were now no more after all the turmoil of the Unplugged situation. See the previous video for more about that. And nor was it Crazy Horse. Instead, Young reached out to a band completely unlike any of his previous collaborators. Back in the October of 1992, Young had appeared as one of many musical guests at Bob Dylan's 30th anniversary concert at Madison Square Garden in New York, alongside Lou Reed, Tom Petty, Eric Clapton, George Harrison and Bob himself, of course, amongst many others. And instead of playing solo acoustic like he had been doing on his recent tour, Young played electric, backed by none other than Booker T and the MGs. Young had already met the band and jammed with them back in the January of 1992 in New York, and now they were the main guys in the backing band for this whole concert, which Young on stage dubbed Bobfest. Booker T and the MGs as an instrumental group and as the house band for Stax Records had defined the sound of Southern Soul in the 1960s. They were the backing band that had played on hundreds of records by artists like Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, Sam and Dave. Many of them huge hits like Soul Man and Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Not only that, but they also had hits of their own, such as the classic instrumental Green Onions, which had sold over 1 million copies back in 1962. During the 70s they had disbanded and reunited a few times before their drummer Al Jackson was tragically murdered in 1975. As individual musicians, Booker T, Steve Cropper and Donald Duck Dunn remained very active, however, in the music scene and ended up working with pretty much everybody, including Bob Dylan. And now at Madison Square Garden with Jim Keltner on the drums, they were the musical backbone for the electric portions of Bobfest. Neil Young walked out onto the stage with Old Black and they launched into a suitably loose and ragged version of Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues, with Young and Cropper both taking solos, but the best was yet to come. Next, they did All Along the Watchtower, and Young delivered some of his most explosive, amp-melting solos as Booker T and the MGs kept everything tight around him. It was a superb balance between two contrasting but complementing styles, the rock-solid groove of the MGs and Young's wild freeform guitar attack. Certainly the most energetic performance of the night, Young pretty much stole the show with a performance of the same par as the one on Saturday Night Live back in 1989. After the show, Young and the band discussed the possibility of them playing again together in the near future. A few months later, in June of 1993, they all got together and played a few warm-up shows around California before heading over to Europe, playing festivals and dates in 13 different countries, including the UK and Ireland, before heading back to the US for 24 more dates. They opened their set with Mr. Soul, which back in the Buffalo Springfield days was almost covered by Otis Redding at one point. Now Young had the next best thing. He could play it live with Otis Redding's band. Watching the video of Neil Young and Booker T and the MGs playing the Werchter Festival in Belgium, July 1993, which is on YouTube at the time of the making of this video, you can see how at ease they were with each other. Young is relaxed and just like at Bobfest, the contrast between Young's looseness and the tightness of the MGs gives the songs a compelling momentum throughout the concert. Cropper's clean tones, the polar opposite of Young's, shine brightly on songs such as the then unreleased Separate Ways, where he elevates the song with stunningly soulful leads. The other unreleased original song that was played on the tour, Live to Ride, has never been officially released or recorded since this tour, nor has it ever been played live again. A shame, since this ode to the motorcycle as an escape from the daily grind is a groovy-arsed rocker, complete with some immense guitar explosions, courtesy of Young's giant red stomp box. Donald Duck Dunn clearly gets a kick out of playing it as well, and during the song, in the video, we also get to see a glimpse of David Briggs running onto the stage to make adjustments to Young's guitar rig, with both Briggs and Young smiling as yet another massive filthy power chord erupts out all over the audience. Briggs had now returned to work with Young once again after their falling out during the making of the Weld live album. According to biographer Jimmy McDonough, the producer just turned up unannounced one day at Neil Young's train barn on his ranch, announcing he had decided to forgive Neil instead of killing him. Briggs got the production credit on Young's Unplugged album, and then went with Young on his Booker T tour, supervising the sound. Young wanted to keep it as loose as possible for this tour. He reportedly told the band, just play whatever you want, and only briefly rehearsed with them once before the tour started. After that, they just did the shows. David Briggs made sure that the band did know the songs by making a tape of the set for them, but other than this, the band was free to play the songs however they saw fit. Briggs did see the problem with this approach, however. Once everybody learned the songs, he said, it became rote. They were just repeating themselves. His issue was that although the band were great every single night without fail, Young had an opportunity to go to a new creative level with these musicians, but he didn't take it. He didn't write any new material with the MGs, and only Live to Ride was an actual new song, Separate Ways being from the mid-70s homegrown period. When the tour ended, Briggs and Booker T and the MGs both expected to receive a call from Young at some point to go into the studio to make an album, but the call never came. Instead, Young, like he had done so many times before, went off in a completely different direction. My heart is telling me to play with Crazy Horse, Young told Jimmy McDonough. This time I'd like to start recording and just not stop, just record for 30 hours and see what that sounds like. Young felt the time was right again for a Crazy Horse album. Briggs was called and told to round up the horse. This time, Young, for once, actually in accordance with Briggs and the band's wishes, would not be recording at his ranch. Instead, in the winter of 1993, they went into the Complex Studios in West Los Angeles. This was the first time since 1986 that Neil Young and Crazy Horse had been in a recording studio together that was outside of Young's ranch. And to avoid any unnecessary distractions, Young rented out the entire building at the expense of $110,000 per week. Using the same process as the Ragged Glory sessions, Young would not show the new songs to the band before the recording sessions. Instead, he got David Briggs to teach the band the basic chord changes one day before the recording started. This approach meant that they only had just enough of the bare bones to grasp the basic structure of the songs, with not enough time to start adding any of that dreaded extra stuff. This was Young and Briggs fully back into their capture the song as it happens for the first time mode. The songs were so new, in fact, Young himself hadn't even played them yet. One exception to this was Change Your Mind, which had been written some months previously and had been played on the road with Booker T and the MGs. In the studio with Crazy Horse, though, the song became a 15-minute epic with multiple extended instrumental passages. It is one of the greatest Neil Young and Crazy Horse jams of all time. All the circumstances aligned, all the preparations, or lack thereof, were just of the right measure to allow the band to flourish during the song. Musically speaking, Change Your Mind seems to be a sort of cousin to Cowgirl in the Sand. It has mostly the same chords, albeit in a slightly different order, A minor to F, C and F in the chorus, and there are extended guitar solos between each verse and chorus. Lyrically, however, this is a different beast, and like with the rest of the songs on this album, Young has remained to this day unforthcoming about his inspiration behind the meaning of the songs. Change Your Mind is as enigmatic as any song on the album. As track number 6, it stands right there in the middle as the centerpiece of the album, and the seemingly contradictory statements about the one you love, whose magic touch can change your mind, supporting and embracing you, yet at the same time destroying you and confining you, are a pattern we see repeated throughout this album, as we will see later. Change Your Mind is the complete opposite flip side to Harvest Moon. In that song, love is a simple, unfettered joy to be celebrated with music and dance. Here, Change Your Mind reveals the multi-layered complexity of a long-term love. It convinces you, distracts you, distorts you, and controls you. It's a human experience, the magnitude of which cannot be simply expressed. And so, the song takes 15 minutes to tell its story through both the lyrics and the instrumental passages, which, like with previous jams Down by the River and Cowgirl in the Sand, attempt to plumb depths only hinted at in the lyrics. According to Jimmy McDonough, Young said that Billy Talbot was very aware that he had recently been playing with one of the great bassists of all time, Donald Duck Dunn, and that it had given Billy a big kick in the ass. He knew what I had heard, said Young. Guitarist Frank Poncho San Pedro was also apparently going through a painful divorce at the time of the recording, so emotionally and mentally, spiritually even, the band was ready to give everything to this recording process. David Briggs later told Poncho that with this album he had given Young the best guitar accompaniment since Danny Whitten, probably the highest compliment it was possible to receive from David Briggs. One of the most interesting things about Sleeps with Angels is that for a Neil Young and Crazy Horse album, it doesn't quite fit the stereotype that had been built up since the 1970s and that had been compounded by Ragged Glory and Weld, that Crazy Horse were all about volume, grunge, distortion, and that is of course also to be found here, but most of the songs have a more delicate approach and involve instrumentation not really seen in a Crazy Horse context before. Marimbas, flutes, vibes, and tack piano adorn several songs, including the opening track, My Heart. There are precedents for this approach, however, as far back as after the Gold Rush, where vibes can be heard on I Believe in You. It's a lesser heard side of the horse, but it has always been there. My Heart starts the album off, and it gives us a fair idea of what to expect, the unexpected. It's a bold choice as an opening song, as it's essentially a lullaby, albeit one sung from a sunken place, a low ebb. The singer sounds like he's almost lost everything, and now doesn't know what love can do. However, even in the face of this, he has a determination to get somewhere, as it's not too late, repeating the phrase as if to convince himself. I've got to keep my heart, he sings, no matter what happens, through sheer bloody-mindedness. Even in the darkest hour of life and deepest depths of doubt, the singer is unwavering in his commitment to finding a way forward. Somewhere, someone has a dream come true, somehow. The singer's down, but he's not quite out. Prime of Life, the second song on the album, is perhaps the ultimate middle-aged rock anthem from the time when being a middle-aged rock star was still a relatively recent phenomenon. The song acknowledges the passing of time without feeling despondent about it. Shadows climb up the garden wall, upon the green the first leaf falls. The prime of life, where the mirror shows both ways, means the singer is now in a position to see where he is in relation to the rest of his life, both forwards and backwards. A vantage point you just don't have when you're younger. Musically, Prime of Life uses the same melody as the chorus of War of Man from Harvest Moon, the first example on this album of a deliberate echoing of a previous song, and it won't be the last. What we haven't heard before though is Neil Young playing a flute, and we get that here on this song for the first time. Another signal that we are in for a different ride with this album. The song is rough around the edges, yet soft at the same time, even with the grungy touches such as the guitar distortion on the middle eighth. It's never harsh though, and Young's vocal is quiet and gentle throughout, giving the song a raw tenderness, delicate, but with enough dirt thrown into there to make it mildly abrasive at the same time, somehow. Drive-By takes the album out of the middle of the road and heads for the ditch, telling the presumably true story of a girl killed in a drive-by shooting. This song is probably one of the reasons Young refused to do any promotion for this album. Too sensitive a subject to isolate comments on, he told Spin magazine in 1995. He didn't want his comments or explanations for the songs to appear in magazines next to adverts. I'm not doing anything with the album. It stands on its own, he said. Now she's gone, like a shooting star, he sings, echoing the first verse from My Heart, where he sings, in the night sky, a star is falling down from someone's hand. And what good is love when such a random kind of thing can extinguish a life in an instant? Sleeps with Angels, the title song, comes next. It was the last song to be recorded for the album in April 1994, after the death of Kurt Cobain. Cobain's suicide had a devastating effect on Young, not least because Cobain had quoted Young's lyric, "It's better to burn out than fade away," in his suicide note. "I don't have the passion anymore," he wrote, "so remember, it's better to burn out than fade away." Nirvana had been one of the very few bands from the 90s that Young had actually listened to. Jimmy McDonough said Young listened to the In Utero album in his car, and in the book Shaky details Young's amazed reaction to watching the stunning finale of Nirvana's Unplugged concert with their performance of Where Did You Sleep Last Night? When he died and left that note, Young said later, "It fucked with me. I wrote some music for that feeling." The song Sleeps with Angels is that music. Young evokes Cobain without ever mentioning names or any specifics, unlike the song Tonight's the Night 20 years previously. Here, Young describes the relationship between Cobain and his wife, Courtney Love. She wasn't perfect, she had some trips of her own, he wasn't worried, at least he wasn't alone, acknowledging that Love may have had her problems too, but at least they had each other until now. Too late. Too soon. Another pairing of apparent opposites on this album. Any action is too late, as he's gone already, too soon. He's always on someone's mind, Young sings, and that is still true over 30 years after Cobain's death, and will be for many more years to come. Musically, the song has suitably distorted guitars, a powerful atonal solo, and a surprisingly, for Crazy Horse, unconventionally off-kilter drum pattern. It's a brief song, but it's the most ominous and maybe the most powerful. And you wouldn't think it, but the lyrics to this song were actually written on a matchbook at a golf tournament hosted by Eddie Van Halen. Okay. Western Hero follows next, and it's a complete change in tone. Sonically, we're back in the Harvest Moon place, but lyrically, we're still mourning. This time we're marking the passing of the archetypal American hero who once fought for justice, worthy causes, but now has big money in his hand. He changed somehow, he's different now. It could apply to America itself, or maybe Young himself, grappling with the compromises that age and success bring. Change Your Mind then follows, which we've covered already, which then leads into Blue Eden, a 7-minute feedback-soaked blues jam with Young vocally ad-libbing fragments of other songs over the top. Lyrics from Change Your Mind, Train of Love, which we've not even heard yet on the album, and some from Drive By. As such, the song acts as a kind of overture for the rest of the album. Musically, as well as some of the atonal guitar soloing is reminiscent of the song Sleeps with Angels from earlier, then one of the most haunting and atmospheric songs Young ever created comes next. Safeway Cart, modern urban decay set in a ghetto dawn, featuring unforgettable imagery, shopping trolley rolling down the street on its own, a sandal mark on the foot of Jesus. It's desolate, almost post-apocalyptic. The music is brilliant. The distorted harmonica wails, a spooky synth alternates between major and minor keys. A muffled guitar repeats a strange descending phrase. It's the perfect musical setting for the lyrics, and it's utterly compelling for all of its 6 minutes. Train of Love is not so much the cousin of Western Hero, but its almost identical twin, with the same musical setting being used for both songs, although it seems like they are different performances, and the lyrics are totally different on each song. Western Hero was mournful, grander and more mythological. Train of Love is more straightforwardly personal and romantic, and could genuinely have been on Harvest Moon, perhaps the only song on this album that actually could have been. Trans Am follows, and it's a time travel song that could be put into the same bracket as Pocahontas. The song starts off in the Old West and rolls through 4 different epochs through each of its verses, the only constant being a ghostly Trans Am car, which witnesses all the changes that America goes through from manifest destiny to global manufacturing. The guitar tone sounds as dusty as the Santa Fe Trail, and again, the music is a perfect match for these lyrics. It eerily feels cinematic, yet somehow claustrophobic at the same time. Piece of Crap follows after, as the second to last song on this album, which is an absolutely superb bit of song sequencing, as it provides a much needed moment of catharsis after the previous 10 songs. If ever there was a Neil Young song you could point to and say, that is actually punk rock, this was it. Simply railing against just how, well, shit the aforementioned global manufacturing actually is when it comes to the commodification and cheapening of everyday objects. It's a joyous and hilarious rant that provides an exhilarating rush just before we conclude the album with the final song, A Dream That Can Last. This final song brings us full circle back to the first song, My Heart. It shares the same instrumentation, and lyrically the song may revisit the young girl that Drive By was about. I saw a young girl who didn't die. It's a vision of a permanent dream state, a heaven where no material possessions exist. The cupboards are bare, but the streets are paved with gold. The angels in this dream state promise a better life someday, somehow, somewhere, somehow and somewhere and someday. These are all vague promises that feature a lot in this album, and it's worth noting that the narrator isn't actually in heaven. He just feels like he's died and gone to heaven. This song also ties itself back to My Heart, with the narrator's determination to see things through to that better life. I saw the distance, I saw the past. I know I won't awaken, it's a dream that can last. He's determined to hold on to that dream still, no matter what. It's a fitting end for what I think is an absolute classic Neil Young album, and one of his very best, actually. One of the reasons I think this is that every song on this album has its own role to play in furthering the themes underlying this album. The album works so well as a cohesive whole because the songs echo each other and complement each other to brilliant effect. There are 12 songs on this album, and each one can be said by me to be twinned with another one. My Heart's twin song is A Dream That Can Last, sharing much of the same instrumentation. Drive By could be paired with Trans Am, both feature cars. Western Hero and Train of Love are the most obviously paired songs. Change Your Mind and Blue Eden could be two sides of the same coin. Both feature extended jamming, and Blue Eden starts with lyrics from Change Your Mind. Likewise, Prime of Life and Piece of Crap both share the same tempo, but vary drastically in their approaches and their energy and their lyrics, obviously. And that leaves Sleeps with Angels, the song, to be twinned with Safeway Car, maybe? Does that work? I don't know, it's just a theory, but I like it. What do you think? Comment if you think I might be onto something, or if you just think that my theory is a piece of crap. The album could also be said to be a kind of latter-day sequel to Tonight's the Night, just like the previous studio album, Harvest Moon, was a sequel to Harvest. Released in August 1994, the album was another hit with critics, but this time Young refused to do any publicity or interviews for the album. Instead, they returned to the Complex studio in October of 94 and performed 4 songs live: My Heart, Prime of Life, Change Your Mind and Piece of Crap, whilst being filmed by film director Jonathan Demme. This was later released on VHS as The Complex Sessions, and they are fantastic performances, filmed cinematically, beautifully by a great director. Neil Young and Crazy Horse did also perform at the annual Bridge School concerts in the same month of October, actually performing 2 dates, doing acoustic versions of the Sleeps with Angels songs both times. But there would be no touring with Crazy Horse for this album. Instead, as 1995 dawned, Young had started hanging out with another band, slightly younger than Crazy Horse, and would end up touring and making an album with them.
Got it from a friend on him, you can't depend. I found it and in the end it was a piece of crap. Piece of crap!
In January 1995, Neil Young was at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Rock Hall of Fame was founded in 1983 by Ahmet Ertegun, head of Atlantic Records, who had also played a crucial part in Neil Young's career by signing Buffalo Springfield back in 1966. Ertegun was a visionary who genuinely loved the band and saw the magic in the interplay between Neil Young and Stephen Stills. Now, nearly 30 years later, Young was now eligible to be inducted into the Hall of Fame as a solo artist, having reached the 25 years threshold for admittance. Young was an active supporter of the Rock Hall of Fame, having previously attended to help induct Jimi Hendrix, the Everly Brothers and Woody Guthrie, and I put this down more to Young's respect and admiration for Ahmet Ertegun more than anything else. Without Ertegun, I can't imagine Young would be that eager to participate. Many rock stars have criticised the very concept of this institution. Bruce Dickinson, for example, called it an utter and complete load of bollocks. If you put music in a museum, he said, it's dead. Burton Cummings from the Guess Who said, it's not a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's got Madonna in it. John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten, called the hall a piss stain, and even Liam Gallagher of Oasis said it's all a load of bollocks and referred to the hall committee as bumberclarts. And quite frankly, I agree. The concept of a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is just too, well, baseball-y for me. Reducing what should be art to just another kind of American sport. But back in 1995, Young was happy to participate in the first MTV broadcast of the Rock Hall's induction ceremony, performing with Crazy Horse a brand new 10-minute long song called Act of Love. Then they were joined by Eddie Vedder, Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam for a performance of Fucking Up. Then Young performed When the Levee Breaks with the 3 remaining quarters of Led Zeppelin, a fever dream of a performance with blistering solos from Young and even Robert Plant joining in on guitar before segueing into For What It's Worth. Young's induction was occasioned by a long speech from Eddie Vedder, who told the audience the many different ways in which Young had been an inspiration to him. A couple of days later, Neil Young and Crazy Horse played a Voters for Choice benefit in Washington DC in support of abortion rights. Also on that bill were Pearl Jam, and after playing a set that included new songs such as Song X and Act of Love, Young later came back out on his own and joined Pearl Jam for the encore. They went straight into Act of Love with Young on vocals. Pearl Jam had in fact already learned the song. At the Rock Hall of Fame induction a couple of nights previously, Eddie Vedder had secretly recorded Young and the Horses' performance of the song on his DAT recorder and secretly learned how to play it. Unbeknownst to the members of Crazy Horse, Young had snuck into Pearl Jam's rehearsal before the Washington gig and agreed to join them for the encore. Pearl Jam's performance of the song with Neil Young on vocals and guitar, with Eddie Vedder just doing backing vocals, was nailed on the spot. It was fucking great. Young said, I was sailing along. It was like floating on a cloud. When Eddie and Jeff sang the choruses, Act of Love just sounded right. It was a bummer for Crazy Horse though. Jimmy McDonough in his biography Shaky says later that night he asked Billy Talbot what he thought of the horseless Act of Love by Pearl Jam and Neil. Was it good? No, Talbot replied ruefully, shaking his head. It was great. Young had been pondering what to do with these new songs, and now opportunities were presenting themselves. He had tried to get David Briggs to record the show in Washington, but Briggs apparently couldn't locate a suitable recording truck in time, so that opportunity passed by. So instead, Neil Young arranged to go to Seattle to record with Pearl Jam on January the 26th and 27th at Nancy Wilson's studio, Bad Animals. Young wanted to go with Pearl Jam's own choice of studio, their own producer, Brendan O'Brien, and play with them on their turf. This decision hit David Briggs the hardest, who was relishing the possibility of recording Pearl Jam, but now both he and the horse were both out of the picture. After a further 2 days recording in February, they had not just recorded Act of Love and Song X, they had recorded enough material for a whole album, in a grand total of 4 days recording time. It was quite an achievement, as Young had only had 2 new songs going into the sessions. He had Song X and Act of Love, but Young believed the sudden pressure of having to write some new songs to record quickly would stimulate his creative nervous system and jolt him into action. He was right. He wrote 5 new songs, including Downtown, Big Green Country and Peace and Love, taking 7 songs into that first session. For the second session in February, Young wrote another 2 songs and they recorded those, as well as 2 new Eddie Vedder songs, and that was it. They had an album. According to Young, there wasn't much talking about the arrangement of the songs. I'd bring the song in and run it down, then everybody would play it. I don't think we did more than 5 takes on anything. It was the Briggs approach without Briggs. Capture the sound quickly, a snapshot of what was happening in the room, audio verite, and at this particular time, with these songs, with this band, the approach worked like a charm. The album, entitled Mirrorball, was released in June 1995, with only Neil Young being credited on the cover of the CD. To avoid legal complications between their two record labels, Reprise and Epic, they agreed to leave the name Pearl Jam off the cover. However, each individual member of the group was credited in the liner notes. One of the songs Young had already written before the sessions kicks off the album, Song X. It's a song about abortion that was musically inspired, according to Young, by the children's song Teddy Bear's Picnic. It's not the only song on the album that touches on this subject. Abortion, I mean, not the dining habits of teddy bears, which does make sense with Young having been convinced to record with Pearl Jam after playing with them at the abortion rights benefit earlier that month. Act of Love follows, another song which deals with the same difficult subject matter. Young says although he himself is pro-choice, the song itself isn't. This isn't an easy subject to confront head-on, Young said. People who say that human beings shouldn't have the right to dismiss a human life, they have a point. You can't dismiss that point. The song that the whole album project grew from, it explodes into life with an enormous G chord, and it's easy to see why Young was so enthused after playing this with Pearl Jam, particularly in his admiration for Pearl Jam's new drummer, calling him unbelievable. He said Irons played his ass off on every take at every session, adding, "I can't say enough good things about him." And you can hear Irons' energy in every beat, every fill, propelling the song forward. One of the main ingredients that makes this album different from a Neil Young and Crazy Horse album, much more of a live wire drummer than Ralph Molina. Irons had previously been a member of the Red Hot Chili Peppers and had a penchant for using a trash can lid as a symbol, much to his new bandmates' delight. Then, after Act of Love, comes perhaps the biggest revelation of the album. I'm the Ocean is a 7-minute stream of consciousness that swells into an oceanic current, a giant undertow, as it builds and builds on the same 4 chords. That it never lets up in intensity is one of the things that makes it so compelling. Irons' kinetic drums again drive the song along, and everyone else is swept along for the ride, surfing wave after wave of fleeting imagery that create a panoramic collage of human existence. I believe there is an overlap on this song with the previous two in terms of its subject matter. Young here seems to start the song at the moment of conception with what could describe the beginning of an unwanted pregnancy. I'm an accident. I was driving way too fast. Couldn't stop though, so I let the moment last. Young, of course, filters it through the lens of his often used car imagery, which he comes back to often during this song as well. The narrator then describes a kind of restlessness. I'm for rolling, I'm for tossing in my sleep, but he assures us it's not guilt because of the people around him, it's something deeper. People my age don't do the things I do, he sings. Young was approaching 50 years old by now, acutely aware of the differences between his lifestyle and the lifestyles of the vast majority of regular 50-year-olds. They go somewhere while I run away with you. He could be talking about his wife, but he also could be talking about his relationship with music and his fans, and in his being at odds with the world in general as an outsider, another theme that will return in this song. The narrator then becomes dissociated. He's floating above everything. We get a series of images. We see a rider in the night, a chieftain and braves taking lives. Who will hold them when they tremble from the knife? A hint of more abortion imagery, perhaps? Then the narrator flashes forward in time to see numbers on screens, lovers parked in cars, homeless heroes and rows of zeros. He sees modern sports, random violence, and Entertainment Tonight, which he then links with the evidence and the testimony of witnesses to the brutal crimes of love, which I think is a reference to the trial of O.J. Simpson, which was happening at the time, where sports, entertainment and murder were all wrapped up nicely together and was being beamed into everyone's homes. In this regard, I'm the Ocean seems to be cut from the same cloth as Ambulance Blues from On the Beach. That song also mixes flashes of autobiography and a kind of social commentary. In Ambulance Blues, the news of the time was full of the Patty Hearst story, i.e. pay off the kidnapper, just as the OJ trial seems to appear in I'm the Ocean. And of course, on the cover of On the Beach, Young is staring out into the ocean. The OJ connection is confirmed for me by the next line, "I was too tired to see the news when I got home." By now the narrator has returned from his dissociated floating to fall back into bed, but he starts dreaming almost instantly, suddenly seeing the mysterious rider once again. For me, this seems connected to the 1974 song, The Old Homestead, where the naked rider gallops through his head. In that song, I think Young is the rider, and now in I'm the Ocean, as soon as he gets home, the rider reappears in his head in a dream. And a woman also features. In the doorway where she stood and watched for him, he's seeing himself apart from himself, dissociated again. "I'm not present," he sings. "I'm a drug that makes you dream." And now he's anything but a human being. He's a car trying to turn against the flow in the outsider's lane again. And then even more than that, he is his own flow. He's the ocean itself, the giant undertow, an archaic elemental force of life and death. Not in an egotistical way either, I believe, more like just a recognition of being one with it, which in fact we all are, even if we don't realise it. So the song does in fact go from the point of conception to death, or the reunion of the life force with its source, which is the same thing. A lot of psychologists will say that dreams of water can symbolise the fear of losing control over your life. It births you and can just as easily drown you. Jung said I'm the Ocean was like a bunch of flashes of things going on all at the same time. The kind of feeling where your life is kind of flashing before you, as if before death, maybe. Another Jung, Carl Jung, alright, it's spelt differently, once said that the sea is the symbol of the collective unconscious because unfathomed depths lie concealed beneath its reflecting surface. And he also said the sea is like music. It has all the dreams of the soul within itself and sounds them over. I doubt if Neil Young has read much of Carl Jung's work, but we do know that he does write with a Jungian approach of letting the subconscious pour out. He said of writing the song, "I tried not to think about what I was writing. I just tried to keep going. And now when I listen to it," he said, "it's different every time." So the conception of life, the artist as outsider, identification with the forces of nature, cars, Native American themes, social commentary, and a smattering of autobiography. Yep, it's all here in this one song. I'm the Ocean is absolutely one of Neil Young's very greatest songs, and a rare one too for an electric song with a band that runs over 7 minutes, as it doesn't contain a single guitar solo. The next song, Big Green Country, again shares some of the same lyrical themes as the previous song, as we start off with the image of the lone rider again, riding across the plain, and the chief with the painted braves closing in for an easy kill. And we also get the reoccurrence of the image from the dream at the end of I'm the Ocean, the woman standing in the doorway waiting for the rider to return. In this way, Big Green Country is kind of a sequel or a continuation of I'm the Ocean, or the song is like an expanded version of that dream, which is kind of confirmed by the last verse, as it suddenly slips from the third person to the first person perspective. Sometimes I feel like a piece of paper, sometimes I feel like my own name, as if the dreamer is waking up. Truth Be Known is next, a melancholic depiction of faded ambition and failed idealism. This is then followed by Downtown, which takes the listener back in time to the heyday of Bill Graham's Fillmore in the late 60s, before the scene migrated into corporate sports arenas, before things got heavy and paranoid in the 70s. Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin are there, which is perhaps influenced by Young's jamming with Led Zeppelin of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the hypnotic Mirrorball is there too, like a water-washed diamond, Young sings, in a river of sin. The song does seem connected to its near namesake, Come On Baby Let's Go Downtown, from Tonight's the Night, where Danny Whitten sings of the moonlight reflecting back from his drug dealer's eye. In this song, the full moon is replaced by a glittering artificial one that itself reflects back into 1,000 eyes, and the chorus almost repeats the title of the previous song verbatim. And of course, Young names the album itself after the Mirrorball. Its dazzling reflective surface, like that of the ocean, distracts the young idealist from a multitude of painful realities contained within and all around him, going down like a whirlpool when you get sucked in. Then we get What Happened Yesterday, a brief reflection on some past tragedy that reuses the same melody from the chorus of Big Green Country, with Young just playing by himself on the pump organ. Peace and Love is the only song where Eddie Vedder shares a lead vocal, and the writing credit as well with Young. As Young put it, "I never finished the song, Eddie finished it." In keeping with the previous few songs, this song reflects on how the idealism of the 60s has now withered. Strength is gone, dying inside. But nevertheless, Young's generation decides to stay for the children, and here he is, a boomer of 50 years, playing and co-writing a song with the Gen X band of the moment. Vedder's verses show the Gen X perspective on the 60s. "I saw the dream, I saw the wake. The children of the boomers grew up to be cynical because the dream was already dead by the time their adulthood arrived." "Throw Your Hatred Down" follows and provides a kind of thematic continuity as well. Young ponders the nature of man's eternal war with himself. Again, the younger generation comes into focus, a major theme of this album, it seems. Children in the schoolyard finish choosing teams divided by their dreams, while a TV screams about how the wars of men start, in a way, in the playgrounds of youth. An underrated song, Young in recent years has revived this, playing it on his 2025 tour. Scenery, the longest song, comes next, and it could be a reflection on the nature of American fame. Sometimes they worship you, sometimes they tear your houses down, where the media makes you a slave to public perception and emotions are commodified. It's another exploration of the gulf between the 60s and the 90s, idealism and cynicism. "In the 60s there was a bond between the artist and the audience," said Young. "It's harder to see now because so much these days is simply down to image projection. But today's pessimistic bands have a vision and an attitude that's unified their generation, just like the Peace and Love groups helped unify the 60s generation." Scenery provides a fitting musical climax to the album, a long jam ending explosively, with Young's guttural solos on one side of the mix, dueling with Mike McCready's on the other. The epilogue to the album is provided by Fallen Angel, a 1 minute and 15 seconds coda to the album that reprises the melody from I'm the Ocean. The Fallen Angel, the former idealist, is now surrounded by walls and neon lights, artificiality, and although is in a sea of people moving like waves behind the beat, they can't feel the rhythm or make a genuine human contact. Where's the big drum? Where's the feel of body heat? The two short pump organ interludes are quite important, I think, to the album as well, and they draw your attention to the most important two songs on the album, which I believe are I'm the Ocean and Big Green Country. Those two songs, which are related, both have their melodies recycled in the two shorter pieces, which help to tie the album together. From 65 to 95 is a long way, and Young had by now driven over every pothole in the road, but he was still there, making vital music with a band half his age. Mirrorball got almost universally great reviews when it came out in June 95. NME in the UK gave it a 9 out of 10, and I remember reading that review at the time, even though I had never heard a note of Neil Young or Pearl Jam's music at that point. The only critic who didn't seem to like it was Robert Christgau, who gave it 1 star. But you know, glittering balls to that. I love this album, and I genuinely think it's one of his best. And coming straight after the masterpiece that was Sleeps with Angels, Young was seemingly on a musical hot streak that didn't look like it was ever going to end. For Pearl Jam, it came just at the right time. Like many other of the big 90s alt-rock bands, after some massive early success, they had struggled to come to terms with it and were trying to figure out how to remain authentic and creative without going insane or completely self-destructing. We were feeling the pressure of being a big rock band at the time, bassist Jeff Ament said, but Neil Young made us realise it wasn't important. It's not life or death stuff, it's just music. Neil Young has been instrumental in why we're still a band, for sure, guitarist Stone Gossard said. Pearl Jam's next album, No Code, showed that they had picked up some tricks from Young, maybe not so much purely musically speaking, but more the ability to just shrug off pressure from the media, the music industry, and even fans to just carry on following their own creative path. Following Mirrorball's release, Young played a couple of gigs with Pearl Jam, one at a small club in Seattle and another at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, where Young stepped in for Eddie Vedder 7 songs into Pearl Jam's set, as Vedder was too ill to continue. Playing most of the Mirrorball album, as well as a few big hitters from Young's catalogue, it was generally agreed that Young had saved the night from turning ugly, with thousands of restless young grungers feeling potentially shortchanged. Then, Young and the Vedless, or Neil Jam as some dubbed them, went to Europe for 11 dates in August, and according to most who saw them, it was superb. One of the greatest tours we ever had in our entire lives. Young's manager Elliot Roberts said later, Neil got off every fucking night. Bootlegs and fan film videos of the shows bear this out, but sadly any official concert releases have yet to be released in either audio or video format, despite their undoubted existence somewhere in the dusty vaults of Young's archive. But instead of finishing the year on a high, fate stepped in to deal a devastating blow to Young's world. After the tour ended in September of 1995, Young and David Briggs once again met up to make amends, as so often they had done in the past. Briggs had not spoken to Young since he had gone off with Pearl Jam, and when Young sent him a copy of Mirrorball, he had thrown it straight in the trash. By now, however, things were different. In the last few months, Briggs had been experiencing excruciating back pain, leading to multiple visits to doctors, who eventually diagnosed him with lung cancer. Briggs told Young's biographer, Jimmy McDonough, to hurry up and finish his book because he wanted to be around to read it, but it was not to be. David Briggs died on November the 26th, 1995. So, whatever Young was to do next, in 1996, it would be without the man who had helped more than any other to shape his music, both as a solo artist and with Crazy Horse, since 1968. At the end of 1995, Neil Young lost his longtime friend and producer, David Briggs, to cancer. It was a devastating loss. Briggs was only 51 years old, and the pair had been musically collaborating and conspiring together since 1968. Now, as 1996 dawned, Young was already back in the studio making a record with Crazy Horse, but not making a Neil Young record. This time he was the producer, under the alias Phil Perspective, helping the Horse make an otherwise Youngless album. Crazy Horse had released 5 albums without Neil Young since 1971, the last one being Left for Dead in 1989, and this was meant to be number 6. However, according to Frank Poncho San Pedro, the album was never finished. Our producer, Phil Perspective, he said, didn't stick around. He turned back into Neil Young and did a Neil Young record instead. Before the project turned back into a Neil Young and Crazy Horse album though, Young went back to basics with the band. He planned a series of very small, unannounced local gigs. Previously, they had warmed up for big tours in smaller venues like The Catalyst in Santa Cruz, but this time, this wasn't small enough for Young. Too big, he complained to his tour manager. That's over 100 people. It ended up being so small, his management company weren't even involved. They sold the tickets on the door. They ended up playing 14 dates at the old Princeton Landing Bar in Princeton by the Sea, Half Moon Bay, California. Only 50 wristbands were sold to the public for each date, although attendees did say there was definitely more than 50 people there every night. Officially, the bar's capacity was 150, but that was on an average day when there wasn't a stage taking up a quarter of the room. Billing themselves as the Echoes, they began there on the 18th of March, playing 4 nights in a row, treating the lucky few who could squeeze into the bar to seldom heard classics like Wonderin', Danger Bird, Stupid Girl and Bite the Bullet, along with a selection of more familiar favourites such as Like a Hurricane and Down by the River. For those who witnessed these gigs, it was not just an unforgettable experience. According to one fan who wrote a review at the time, when you're practically on stage with the band, it becomes a transcendental experience. One attendee went down to the bar earlier in the day and hung around while the band sound-checked. The patrons that were already there were asked to leave the bar, and they could hear Neil Young and Crazy Horse playing a new song, Big Time, through the walls. The first 4 shows were advertised outside the venue with small black and white posters just saying The Echoes, repeat performances beginning March the 18th. But after the first show, word got out that it was in fact Neil Young and Crazy Horse, and soon fans were lining up every day to secure a wristband to see the show. As a gesture in honour of their recently departed friend, David Briggs, the stage lighting for these shows comprised of just a dozen or so candles placed at various points on amps and speakers around the stage. This would be one of the many elements of the Princeton shows that would be carried forward and recreated on the later official tour of Europe and North America. For Poncho, he said that these gigs were the best thing that ever happened to the horse, saying that it had made them a band again. There were other gestures in honour of David Briggs at these shows as well. Songs from Briggs' favourite horse record, Zuma, featured heavily, and Young also resurrected When Your Lonely Heart Breaks, a song from the Life album that Briggs had been trying to push Young to work harder on, as he felt it had great potential, which they weren't living up to. The band decided to finally give the song the treatment it deserved. He was really pissed that we didn't do a great record with that one. Young said, "It makes you want to do it really well now." And technically, David Briggs was still in the building. Poncho had taken some of his ashes and stashed them in one of his amps. "David's coming on the road," he said. After the first 4 shows, Young and the Horse began recording new songs just up the road at Young's ranch. These included Big Time, Slip Away, and Loose Change. After a further 4 shows at Princeton Landing, they did some more recording, and then the album Broken Arrow was completed, with the final track being added to the album being a cover of Jimmy Reed's Baby What You Want Me to Do, recorded live with a bootleg level of quality at the tiny Half Moon Bay bar. Released in July 1996, Broken Arrow received almost universally bad reviews, ending a 7-album run of basically being the critics' darling. People magazine declared it one of the worst albums of the year, and Spin magazine, having spent the past few years singing his praises constantly, was now accusing him of complacency and attempting just to ride out his career on past glories. One review said that the album lacks any real centre of gravity, it meanders, indulges in whimsy, and is largely dull. Young, it seems, had been expecting this. "They'll shit on this one," he said before the release of the album. "There's enough weaknesses in this one for them to go for it." What the critics failed to pick up on, however, is that the album was deliberately constructed this way. It's purposefully vulnerable and unfinished, said Young, and I wanted to get one under my belt without David. Young's critics misinterpreted the album as a sign that without Briggs, Neil and the Horse were just lost, unable to recapture the lightning in a bottle glories of their former days. But in reality, Broken Arrow is the sound of a band finding themselves again, getting closer to the source of their inspiration than ever before. Young said in his memoir, Waging Heavy Peace, that at their last meeting before his passing, he had asked Briggs for any advice he had for him and his music going forward. "Just make sure to have as much of you in the recording as you can," he said. "Stay simple. No one gives a shit about anything else." He told me to keep it simple and focused, he said. "Have as much of my playing and singing as possible, and to not hide it with other things that aren't necessary. Be great or be gone." His famous phrase echoes in my head. I have to remember that for sure. In light of this, contrary to what the critics were saying, Young was actually following Briggs' advice to the letter, and as such, Broken Arrow is actually the perfect tribute to his mercurial, mysterious brother, as he put it. The album's opener, Big Time, is somewhat autobiographical, relating Young's musical beginnings and his first journey from Canada to California in the mid-60s, getting in an old black car, gonna take a ride so far, to the land of suntan lotion. There he meets the ocean's daughter, who waves to him and calls him over. Now, you could interpret this as representing a real person Young met in California, but I believe the ocean's daughter is representative of the muse, inspiration, to whom Young would devote himself entirely. From that time onwards, Young has often associated inspiration for his work with travel or journeys. He once said about his career that he always had his bags packed, ready to follow the muse. The chorus of the song, "I'm still living the dream we had, for me it's not over," is not just personally poignant, sung in memory of their recently departed friend, but also a reminder to everyone, fans and critics alike, that for Young, the 60s never actually ended. Whatever it was that he started doing back then, he was still doing it, whatever else is going on in the world. Young acknowledges how his own demons often divert him from his dream, talking about the enemy inside of me. However, he does always know how to get back on track, talking about the youthful fountain. It's following the muse that has kept him young, as fresh inspiration, when it comes, always brings with it renewal and rebirth. Talking about you and me, he sings. Talking about eternity. Talking about the big time. I think he is addressing Briggs directly, and for Young and Briggs, the big time wasn't just about money, success, fame or notoriety. It was about creating music that was an authentic expression of what was happening. And in this regard they succeeded many times over. And for Young, it's a pursuit that never ends. The big time is also another way of describing eternity, the biggest time of all. And as of the time of recording this video, in January 2026, nearly 30 years after the release of this song, Neil Young is still living the dream they had. For him, it's still not over. Musically, Big Time is, well, big, expansive. The extended jams really do give the impression of traversing huge distances, long roads, wide horizons. Loose Change comes next, and also finds Young standing in the middle of his life, looking back as well as forwards at the possible roads to take. Some roads bring renewal, some roads hide and wait, he sings. Following on from Big Time, he's about to take another journey. Loose change in my pocket, future in my hand. But he's also wary of becoming sidetracked, too many distractions for me to understand. Musically, the band stretch out even more here, hanging on to that one F chord for the last 5 minutes of the song, with Young soloing in the C major scale, which I'm told is the Lydian mode. This creates a compelling unresolved tension to the jam and gives the band an ocean of space to play around in. It's one of the Horse's best jamming tunes, and quite frankly even 9 minutes feels a bit too short in my opinion. There are also extended moments of repeated chord phrases and muted strumming that almost sound post-punk at times. Slip Away comes next, which lyrically is perhaps inspired by the gigs at Princeton Landing. The smoke in the barroom nights, the faces at the window. When they played at the small bar, all of the windows would be covered up, apart from one to the left of the stage, which Young requested to be left uncovered so people could get a glimpse of the band as they played. And that seems to have prompted that lyric. And when the music started, he sings, she just slipped away. A simple celebration of losing your mind to music. Musically, the song is another long jam. Young had never started an album like this before, with 3 lengthy jam songs, one after the other. Before, usually they would be spaced out in the track listing, such as on Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, for example. This time, the jam hangs on the D chord for around 3 or 4 minutes, and there's not many bands that can play one chord for that length of time and still hold your attention, but the Horse does it every time. Change in Highways was originally written in 1974 and was recorded at Poncho's first ever recording session with the band, but it was never worked on further. Poncho, however, was fond of it and kept the song in his back pocket, whipping it out one day at the 1996 sessions. Young, who had completely forgotten the song by this time, agreed they should do it. Scattered, brackets, Let's Think About Living, close brackets, often gets maligned as one of the weaker songs on the album, but it is in fact a touching tribute to David Briggs. Like a comet painted on the sky, like an old soul, over darkness you'll fly. This Town is definitely one of the weaker songs on the album. There's not much to it, and most likely that is the point. I'm not asleep when I'm lying down, Young sings. I'm asleep when I'm walking around this town. But again, I view this through the lens of the band's grief for their departed friend. It describes a state of numbness. The album's sole acoustic song, Music Arcade, features a vocal from Young so quiet you can hear his lips moving during the song as he sings the words. It's the most vulnerable song on the album. If This Town was a song about a cloudy state of numbness, then this is the next stage of grief, more awake, facing down some very sobering thoughts. Have you ever been lost? Have you ever been found out? He whispers, his fingers barely touching the strings of the guitar as he strums. The song also features a return of the comet from Scattered. There's a comet in the sky tonight. Makes me feel like I'm alright. The song is purposefully jumbled up. He feels alone, then down, then good, then alright, then down again. A little bit high, a little bit low, just like Scattered again. One of the main reasons why this album got such bad reviews, in my opinion, is because of the sequencing of the songs, starting off with 3 long extended jams before the second half of the album gets increasingly quieter, more vulnerable, more downbeat. The songs get shorter and simpler until he's whispering over a barely strummed guitar. As with Sleeps with Angels and Mirrorball, the sequencing of this album is actually one of the most brilliant things about it. The trio of Scattered, This Town and Music Arcade all coming together towards the end makes complete sense, as they all relate and allude to each other lyrically and absolutely succeed in painting the picture that Young wants you to see. After this, the only place to go is back to Princeton Landing, where we get a cover of Jimmy Reed's classic Baby What You Want Me to Do, recorded live at one of the shows at the tiny bar that effectively spawned this album. Seemingly recorded on a single stereo mic from the audience, it sounds like a bootleg, and in fact some of the bootlegs sound better than this, but it is in its own way the perfect way to end the album. Remember what Briggs said to Young the last time they met: keep it simple and focused, have as much of your playing and singing as possible, don't hide it with any other things. Well, mission accomplished. And while it certainly may not be the best album they ever made together, it might be, however, in my opinion, Neil Young and Crazy Horse in their purest, rawest, most vulnerable form. It's 100% Horse all the way through, wherever you slice into it. You get all the good bits mixed in with the shitty bits, and that ain't for everyone, so no wonder the critics weren't too hot for it. But still, the sudden fall from critical favourite to last week's news does seem quite surprising now, looking back. Musically, the album wasn't so much different from the previous offerings of the 90s, but as Jimmy McDonough noted in his book Shaky, it probably wasn't due to the music itself, but more the fact that in the past few years, he wrote, Young had been in the spotlight without a break, and people were a little worn out. Young, of all people, had let himself get overexposed. Before the album was released, when the band was still playing dates at the Princeton Landing, on June the 4th they played the entire album from start to finish, from Big Time through to Jimmy Reed. After a few more shows there, and 2 at the Catalyst in Santa Cruz, the band headed over to Europe and played Switzerland, Germany, Scandinavia, the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Ireland and the UK, where they memorably, for me anyway, performed an absolute monster set at the Phoenix Festival in England, which was shown on TV. They then headed back over to North America for more dates, and they basically continued touring on and off for the rest of 96, and then continued through to the summer of 97. And in 1997, the live album Year of the Horse was released, accompanied by a movie of the same name, directed by Jim Jarmusch. The live album, like Broken Arrow, received mostly negative reviews across the board, so it was official now. The Horse were no longer flavour of the month. The grunge bubble had long since burst, but of course Neil and the Horse were still doing what they had always done, and in fact had never done it better. Having taken Briggs' advice seriously, they were now closer to the source than ever before. The versions here of Barstool Blues, Danger Bird, Sedan Delivery and the newer songs are equal to or even better than the originals, in my opinion, in some cases. The electrified version of Pocahontas here is absolutely superb and brings it back closer to its original conception. When Young and the Horse first recorded it back in 1975, it was in this arrangement, albeit in a different key. Young's vocal is impassioned, and also, does anyone else think he sounds a bit like Michael Stipe on this song at times? This song really reminded me of the huge influence of Neil Young on R.E.M. But for me, the absolute highlight is Danger Bird. Emerging from the tail end of the previous song, Scattered, the song's opening riff with its famous windshield wiper guitar noises, the song slowly rouses itself, then tentatively at first takes flight, and then it soars, and then it ascends into the stratosphere. This is why I can't take people seriously if they dismiss this album. It contains some truly transcendent moments like this, and like Broken Arrow represents the purest form of Neil Young and Crazy Horse currently available on the market. Just lie back and smell the horse. Sedan Delivery delivers on all fronts. It somehow manages to be even more punky and demented than any previous versions. Not bad for a bunch of 50-year-old grandpas. The version of When Your Lonely Heart Breaks, which I think was recorded at Princeton Landing, judging from the sound of the audience, does infinitely more justice to the song than the version on Life that David Briggs was so unhappy with. Here, the band are fully emotionally committed to the song, and it shows in the playing, in the vocals. The 2 albums, Broken Arrow and Year of the Horse, taken together, despite whatever the critics said, do in fact form the perfect tribute to their fallen friend. With every extended jam, as Poncho put it, we were playing him on his way. The Year of the Horse movie, directed by Jim Jarmusch, is part documentary, part concept movie, all shot on Super 8 and video cameras. Back in 1995, Young had recorded a free-form improvised soundtrack to Jarmusch's existential western Dead Man, starring Johnny Depp. The soundtrack album was released in March of 1996, and it was Young's first attempt at a full movie score, and is still an enjoyable listen to this day. For those of us that take great pleasure in hearing Young noodling around on his old guitar, it's essential listening. Like many of Jarmusch's films, Year of the Horse has a loose structure and jumps back and forward in time. The two main periods it focuses on are 1996 and 1976. The interviews in the film are casual and often extremely funny, introducing the band members as if posing for police mugshots. The movie paints an authentic picture of the band as more than just a sound, as Elliot Roberts puts it. These guys have been together almost 30 years, he said. So what these guys bring to the table when they show up is literally their lives with Neil. We've been through everything with them. The film also features some scenes from the then unreleased 1986 documentary Muddy Track, so we get an authentic cross-section of the band through 3 different decades. The film is a treasure trove of rare snippets, including a cameo from Neil's dad. We get to see the band with their guard down, laughing with each other, smoking joints backstage in Glasgow, setting fire to plastic flowers in hotels, having blazing rows, and of course full-length song performances, including the rarely played Stupid Girl. Jimmy McDonough in Shaky did not think much of the movie, saying it was hopelessly soft and full of phony camaraderie. But I think this is a bit off the mark and needlessly harsh. I think the movie is very true to the spirit of the band and tells their story accurately, and for me remains to this day the definitive portrait of Neil and the Horse. And the music, of course, is fantastic, despite whatever the critics have to say about it. And then, after the almost constant touring of 96 and 97, Neil Young then did nothing in 98, apart from Farm Aid and 2 Bridge School benefit concerts, all in the October, after a full-on 90s that had seen Young come back to the top of the rock pile with a series of amazing albums. 1998 marked the first year since 1984 where no new Neil Young album was released and no tour, not even a small local one. So, as the 21st century approached, what would the future hold for the 50-something-year-old Neil Young? Was he now winding down, preparing for retirement? Would we only see the occasional tour or album from now on, every few years? Well, no. This is Neil Young we're talking about. Believe it or not, the next decade would have just as many albums, projects, movies, controversies, and as much new music as any decade so far. In fact, if anything, it has even more. So we will be taking a look at what happened next in the next video in this series. So stay tuned, subscribe to this channel, give us a thumbs up, check out our Patreon for extra stuff. Consider supporting us by buying tickets to our gigs or buying some merch. Links to everything are in the description below this video. But until the next video, that's all from me on this one. Bye for now.